reason alone. So clearly, whichever way this comes out of the ringer, there's going to be an upset by December.
And yet, to some extent, this mess, and let's be frank about it, it is a total mess in Belfast.
Indeed.
This, to some extent, is an example that the British government can use. When the British government is talking to the Americans, when it's talking to the Europeans, it can say, look at what the Good Friday Agreement was. Look at what the Belfast Agreement said. That was that you needed cross-community support to govern. You need the unionists to be content and the nationalists to be content. The British government's argument is that the unionists cannot be content.
Okay.
They cannot join government as long as the protocol is in place as it is right now.
I think we've just got some more reaction at Stormont. Let's head back and listen to the latest reaction.
Of their dire policy decisions and their political choices on the lives of workers and families here. Jeffrey Donaldson points the finger at everyone else for the DUP's own indefensible and enduring failures. The facts are that back in May, people voted for change. They voted because they want politics to work. The electorate want grown-up politicians to take everyday challenges seriously, the things that impact on the lives of workers and families. Jeffrey Donaldson and the DUP do not take these matters seriously. At a time when so many workers and families and businesses are suffering from the incredible pressures of the cost of living crisis, at a time when our health service is broken and needs fixed, at a time when waiting lists need to be tackled, people need to know that we have their backs. The Secretary of State met with the parties yesterday, restating his position that 1 minute past midnight tonight, should no First Minister and no Deputy First Minister be appointed, that he will call another election. And here we are here in this chamber today, and in this hour, we could appoint a Speaker, a First Minister, a Deputy First Minister, appoint a new executive who could meet immediately to take decisions to put money into people's pockets today. But the DUP are continuing to deny and disrespect the outcome of the May election. The DUP want yesterday. That's no longer available to you. But what the people here want is the change that they voted for back in that May election. Yesterday evening, the new British Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, met with European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. They stressed the importance that they both place on relationships between London and Brussels and on working together as friends and allies as they confront the global challenges and the uncertainties of war in Europe and the energy crisis. But they also stated that their shared preference for joint solutions and a negotiated solution to the current protocol issues, which will provide the stability and predictability that society and businesses here need after the disruption and the upheaval of Brexit. Now, most parties in this chamber, whilst opposed to Brexit, do support the protocol and also want it to work better. So the negotiating parties have our fulsome support to land a deal. But for the avoidance of doubt, let's also be clear. This Assembly and this Executive has no mandate or no role in these negotiations. So to hold back power sharing and to hold down the public in the meantime is futile, it's reckless, it's short-sighted and it's also senseless. So the public will give their verdict on all of that in the matter of the next number of weeks. And if the DUP continue to block power sharing, let's also be clear that direct rule, as we've known it in the past, is not an option. The alternative to power sharing is joint authority from London and Dublin.
Mr. Paul Gibbon.
The recall of this Assembly is another flawed and failed attempt at trying to form a new executive, and each time Unionist members in this House and our mandate is disrespected. Power sharing, if it is to mean anything, has to be about consensus and consent, not contempt, which is what we on these benches have been subjected to on every occasion that the recall of this Assembly has taken place over the past 6 months. And it has no credibility coming from the parties that demanded a border within the United Kingdom down the Irish Sea. It has no credibility from Sinn Féin, who refused to take their seats at Westminster, who boycotted this Assembly for 3 years, and the First Minister for all, self-proclaimed, walked out of the health service for 3 years, kept these institutions down. The Alliance Party, who demand majority rule, to exclude the DUP, Not once did they seek the recall of this Assembly in 3 years and join with Unionists when Sinn Féin blocked it. Not once did the Alliance Party seek to exclude Sinn Féin in order to reform these institutions, but now they want to exclude unionism. And the SDLP, who now call for joint authority, along with Sinn Féin and the Alliance Party, seek to threaten unionism.
Mr. Given, point of order. Ms. Armstrong.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Speaker. I just would wonder if you could clarify for me today, as a point of order, if today's vote on Speaker is cross-community, and in that vote, if those of us who are designated as others will carry the same weight of vote as everyone else.
Today's vote is a cross-community vote, as set out in the Constitution of this Assembly.
The cross-community party that no longer wants this place to operate in a cross-community fashion. It's rich coming from the Alliance Party. But progress will not be made. It will not be made by trying to isolate, denigrate and intimidate the Democratic Unionist Party. The DUP does support devolution. We're ready to appoint ministers today, and we respect the mandates of all parties and the positions that they would be entitled to based upon the last election. But the barrier to devolution is not the DUP, it's the Northern Ireland Protocol. And when this is addressed, we are ready to form a new executive, both now, and that will be our position after the election, irrespective of the outcome. So what the Secretary of State now needs to do is to get on with his job so that we can do our job. It was the United Kingdom government in New Decade, New Approach 2 years ago made a commitment that Northern Ireland's place within the UK internal market would be fully restored and respected. They've failed to do it, compounding the failure of that government and this Secretary of State who voted for the legislation that's created the mess of the protocol. It's a protocol that, let me remind members, at a time of cost of living, is costing hundreds of millions of pounds of taxpayers' money through the Trader Support Scheme. £6 million per month. That's £32 million at checks at the ports already. It's increased costs to businesses, consumers. It threatens our medicine supply chain, both for humans and indeed for animals. It's driving up the cost of infrastructure with a tariff on steel. It excludes Northern Ireland from benefiting from any VAT reduction that may come into place in Great Britain. So this, in a cost of living crisis, the protocol is the single biggest driver of that within a Northern Ireland context. And so as people face a cost of living crisis, the Secretary of State is set to call an election so that he can save face. To do so by the Secretary of State will be an admission of failure on his part and the part of the UK government, because it is they who have promised the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, who are negotiating with the European Union, and to this day there has been abject failure on the part of the UK government. So it will be the Secretary of State that will own the decision to call this election. But unlike the Conservative Party, we're not afraid of an election if it is called. We're ready to seek a renewed mandate to get the fair deal and a restoration of devolution on the basis of both Unionists and Nationalists supporting it. That is the solid foundation upon which this Assembly needs to be created. I'll give way.
I thank the member for giving way, and he's absolutely right to highlight, in a cost of living crisis, the huge costs associated with the Northern Ireland Protocol to date. But would he agree with me that that's a semi-skimmed version of a protocol which is only a date operating at 10%? If we get the full fat version supported by the Alliance, the Sinn Féin and indeed the SDLP, what would the cost be there? Our logistics sectors would hold to...
So let's just explain what we've been watching, and it is Stormont trying to get itself back into action and failing. That was a 12 noon effort to get the Speaker and Deputy Speaker back in position to get power sharing back up and running, because London basically saying if you don't get Stormont power sharing back into action, there will be new elections. Doogie is there for us and has been following this. Doogie, the political vacuum continues, it seems.
And it's getting worse. We can now see that the DUP are really feeling the pressure. You can tell from the body language and the the words that are coming out of them, that they feel that they have been let down by the Secretary of State. They're very much saying that he voted along with everybody else for the protocol that has brought down these institutions, and they are not going to get back up with the DUP at any one time unless the protocol is fixed. So it does seem that the Secretary of State is putting pressure right on the DUP and trying to push that, as he sees that as the weakest link to getting them back. That does not bode well for any standing up to the EU. On the other side of that argument, the nationalists are saying, well, we had a mandate, we got back, we want to take this. But Sinn Féin, of course, are set to be the largest party in the Republic of Ireland, and they need that protocol to protect the Republic of Ireland's economy. They cannot be seen as one thing in one place and something else in another. So this is a very, very tricky point for both Sinn Féin and the DUP, but the body language and mood music here is very, very bad indeed. We will be looking at elections mid-December. What they actually bring back, nobody knows, because Sinn Féin will turn this into a border poll, and nationalists will vote that direction, and the DUP will very much turn it into stay inside the UK, and even unionists with a small u will vote their direction. That will squeeze the middle ground of the SDLP and the Ulster Unionist Party. We don't know where the Alliance will go in that vote. The Alliance could come back as the second biggest party. It may actually be trashed altogether. It's where those transfer of votes go, because we vote here under a PR system, which always delivers a very mixed government. So if that happens in mid-December and we come back with the Sinn Féin and the DUP, well then we'll still be looking at a stalemate. The protocol's still not fixed, and all we've happened is it has been even more divisive. And what goes into that vacuum during that time could be frightening.
Dougie, we're still seeing Stormont in action to a degree, one ought to say. The MLAs are discussing the matters. Jeffrey Donaldson has said that his party members can go in and talk, but the executive members, the cabinet members, are not taking their seats, their positions. So basically no decisions can be made. The Speaker, as I understand, has not been voted. So effectively whatever is voted won't apply. So again, it's like a sort of limbo. Tell us what happens next. They've got till midnight tonight to try and get something together. Or Chris Heaton-Harris, the Northern Ireland Secretary, has said these elections will go into train.
Well, Northern Ireland's Assembly is very unique. It is built up of cross-community consent. So they all get elected back to the House, which is the Assembly here. Then a Speaker is elected, and then business can go on with the committees. Well, that's the second part of this. And of course, then you have the executive themselves, and they are ministers that are into a forced coalition round a table, and those ministers are selected by how many MLAs they got back into the institution behind us. So Sinn Féin would be the largest, followed by the DUP, then the Alliance, and so on until it comes down the road. Those ministers look after departments in there. So you have the Communities Minister, Health Minister, etc., and they all have to agree the way forward. That's then inspected by the committees. That's how everything keeps together, and it all must be cross-party. Well, the biggest problem here is, of course, that none of the unionists support the protocol. So that has driven a horse and cart straight through the Good Friday Agreement, of which the foundation of this very institution is built upon, because it says that everything is on consent. It also says, and two clear statements at the start of those negotiations, I remember it well, was the John Major and the Irish Taoiseach had to sign an agreement that said that both parties no longer had a strategic, financial or selfish interest in Northern Ireland. And of course that has now changed, because the EU want to protect their single market. So Ireland is no longer a neutral in this. There's no longer a Secretary of State in Britain bringing in the Irish Foreign Affairs Minister and then bringing in the United States, because of course the United States have already made it very clear they're not neutral in this. So that perfect storm or perfect position that was back in 1998 isn't there anymore. That was a once in a lifetime position where everybody could get together and negotiate the Good Friday Agreement. And it is not looking well at all.
Dougie, thank you for outlining that and the difficulties, of course, ahead. Let's actually bring in Darren McCaffrey now, our political editor, who's at Westminster. And Darren, we've been speaking in this last day or two about the Prime Minister's new in-tray. The Northern Ireland protocol heading back up to the top of that in tray once more.
Yeah, it is indeed. Obviously, as we say, with the possibility of a winter election in Northern Ireland, that will be pretty divisive, I would suggest, given where politics is there, and at a time in which people are frankly fed up to the back teeth of Stormont not sitting, of no executive, or politicians not able to make decisions on their behalf. There is a practical, hard reality to all of that, that while here in England and in Wales, in Scotland, people are likely to receive, or are going to receive, £400 off their bills this winter over the next 6 months or so, when it comes to energy prices and that cost of living crisis, they have still not worked out a mechanism for that to happen in Northern Ireland. There is also a suggestion that there should be money off bills when it comes to home heating oil, which is more relevant in Northern Ireland than natural gas, and yet again there is no mechanism of doing that. Listening to one commentator this morning who said, frankly, people will not be prepared to put up with politicians knocking on their door, asking for their votes on their doorstep, at the same time while they're trying to keep their homes warm at increased cost. And of course, Northern Ireland is one of the more socially deprived parts of the United Kingdom, where the cost of living crisis is felt more acutely. So all in all, this is very tricky. And just to pick up on the point that you and Tom were talking about, you know, I get this position that, of course, politics in Northern Ireland has to be done by consent. The problem for the British government is that when they talk to the Irish government or the American government, or indeed to the EU, there is a fundamental problem with all of this. This has been brought about, whether you like it or not, by the British government. Clearly, by signing that protocol in 2019, something that Theresa May said that no British government could ever do, the British government brought about the circumstances in Northern Ireland where the DUP feel that they cannot go into government because they want the protocol either scrapped or fundamentally changed. So the British government cannot be an honest broker in all of this, in the sense because they've created the mess where Stormont just doesn't exist.
OK. Darren, thank you for that. We'll speak to you in a moment about the other pile of stuff in his in-tray, including the new Home Secretary, of course, proving a bit of a headache. But let's head back to Tom here in the studio. And we reflect that the Sunak government has reversed quite a bit of the Liz Truss government so far. What about the approach on Northern Ireland? Well, it's interesting. We'll remember back during the leadership contest, not that many days ago, really, only on Monday, the European Research Group, which is on the right of the party. Which is on the right of the party. The hardcore Brexiteers of the party, led by Mark Francois, one of the Spartan MPs. They're the people that voted against the deal every single time. Yeah. They didn't endorse either candidate, Penny Mordaunt or Rishi Sunak, despite expectations, because, they say, both were committed to the Northern Ireland Protocol bill. Now, this is Liz Truss's bill that she managed to get through the House of Commons. It's now having a very tough time in the House of Lords, where, of course, the government doesn't have a majority. Yep. But Rishi Sunak says that he is committed to the principle of that bill, that if negotiations with the European Union fail, if the European Union will not reopen the implementation of the protocol, will not renegotiate that protocol, then the British government takes unilateral action. That's the ethos of the bill. Right. That's the ethos that Rishi Sunak still supports. However, I would say that Sunak is emphasising negotiation first and the bill as a backup option. Okay. And of course, he spoke to the Irish Taoiseach and the European Union Commission President just last night. And the suggestion is, and buying off perhaps is not the correct political term, but certainly people are saying that he bought off the ERG by putting Suella Braverman in place as the Home Secretary. So has that bought him perhaps a little bit of wriggle room on this particular issue with the ERG and others? Well, let's not forget, Rishi Sunak himself did vote leave in the 2016 referendum. He was an up-and-coming Cameroon at the time and really did break a lot of ties with that sort of establishment of the party by being this up-and-coming rising star who declared that he was in favour of leaving the European Union. So he is a sort of true believer in that sense. Right. But also he's a guy that does make deals, that does want to have a more conciliatory approach. So he is straddling, he is walking this tightrope to some extent. I would say, however, that even though Liz Truss did not accomplish all that much in her 50 days as Prime Minister, one of the things that we were starting to hear was that perhaps the European Union were ready to move on what's called the Red Channel, Green Channel approach to trade, where goods that were going to Northern Ireland to stay in Northern Ireland may not have to be checked. If the reports are true about what Liz Truss was achieving in her last couple of weeks
weeks as Prime Minister, we could maybe see some sort of deal come about between Britain and the European Union that ameliorates the worst of the protocol. And
So
that
like a
might be
halfway
enough.
house, if you like.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the goods that are going to Northern Ireland that may go further, they'd be checked.
Yeah.
But the goods that are going to Northern Ireland to stay in Northern Ireland would not be checked. If that's a compromise the EU can agree to, that might solve this all.
Yeah, a lot of red tape involved in that, I want to imagine. Tom, for the moment, thank you. We're just going to break away now to our other developing story this lunchtime here on GB News, and that is that the authorities, we understand, currently responding to what we call multiple incidents in the English Channel, with the people smugglers sending more inflatable boats into the water in difficult weather conditions. Home and Security editor Mark White, as ever, is on top of the story for us. Mark, what are we learning about the situation in the Channel?
Well, we're told that so far at least 7 small boats have been pushed out into the English Channel. We've had several days of really bad weather conditions in the Channel, so nothing has come across. It's improved slightly today, but still, you know, pretty treacherous out there. 30-mile-an-hour winds. Pretty high waves as well, especially for these flimsy inflatable boats that the people smugglers use. So lots of these boats predictably now getting into difficulties and calling the rescue services. So the Dover lifeboat, Ramsgate and Dungeness lifeboats, several Border Force vessels, all responding to incidents.
So this is still our, if you like, maritime force of whatever nature dealing with it, rather than the French?
The French are also involved in these incidents as well. The most worrying would appear to be one that's taking place at the Colbert Light Buoy, which is about 9 miles off the Kent coast. Reports that someone was seen clinging to that buoy, signalling passing shipping for help. That was relayed to the Coast Guard. Rescue services have attended. They found personal belongings on top of the buoy, no sign of any person. So real concern that that person, whoever it was, has been swept into the water.
And this is what we should reflect when we talk about the whole issue about whether the migrants should be coming. But there is a human cost to all this. And clearly some of the reports suggesting children are also on board some of these boats.
Well, there's no doubt, I mean, the majority are young men that are, and we're, more than 80% of those coming across are young men. But yes, there are some women and children that are on these boats as well. And the real concern that the authorities have is that, you know, there is a potential for large-scale tragedy. We saw it last November, 27 people drowned. But let's not forget, even though that was the 27 drownings in one incident, there have been multiple incidents over the course of the last year or two where individuals have fallen overboard, have succumbed to hypothermia, have drowned, have drifted away, that they've never been found. This may well be another such incident as well that they're responding to.
Now, meanwhile, you were down in Thanet in Kent at Manston for us yesterday at the centre where they are being processed. Presumably that's what they were there for, but they're just being held at the moment. There's now been an urgent question in the Commons today on this very topic.
Yes, that's right, because the Independent Chief Inspector of Borders visited that Manston base himself on Monday and said he was left speechless with the conditions. This is supposed to be a processing centre where, when people arrive on the Kent coast, they're taken to Dover initially, and then they go to Manston for checks that are not supposed to take any more than about 24, 48 hours. Then after that, Mark, they go out to interim accommodation, to hotels, eventually into probably council house stock.
But some of them disappear as well, don't they, as you
well,
said?
this with the Albanians, yes, this is a big factor. The Albanians, by and large, they're not going to qualify for asylum from the country that they left. It's not a war-torn country at all.
Economic migrants.
And they want to come across, according to authorities, to disappear into the illegal economy, more worrying, actually, to work for criminal gangs. So they go, they're put into these hotels, and within a day or two, they disappear off into that illegal economy.
Yeah. So what happens at Manston, of course, of absolute importance. Mark, for the moment, thank you. And, of course, we'll get an update as you learn more about what's happening in the Channel. Thanks for the moment. Just to alert you to the fact that we've got about 350,000 health workers, including nurses and paramedics, voting now on whether to go on strike over pay. We'll have the latest on that coming up. First, let's get the news headlines for you.
12:30. I'm Alice Porter in the GB newsroom. The leader of the Democratic Unionist Party says he will not support the reformation of the Stormont Assembly. Sir Geoffrey Donaldson made the comments amid crunch talks in a final effort to restore the Assembly this afternoon. MLAs are in Stormont attempting to elect a new Speaker, prerequisite before an executive can be appointed. But the bid is set to fail if the DUP use its veto to block it. Under the current system, unless a power-sharing executive is formed before midnight tonight, Northern Ireland could be facing another election. But Mr Donaldson says unionists will not accept joint authority.
I do not believe that sufficient progress has been made to addressing the issues of concern to the people that we represent. We were given a mandate, a clear mandate in the Assembly elections, that we would not nominate ministers to an executive until decisive action is taken on the protocol. That remains our position, and so today we will not be supporting the nomination of ministers to the executive.
But the Vice President of Sinn Féin blamed the DUP for the failure to form an executive.
Geoffrey Donaldson points the finger at everyone else for the DUP's own indefensible and enduring failures. The facts are that back in May, people voted for change. They voted because they want politics to work. The electorate want grown-up politicians to take everyday challenges seriously, the things that impact on the lives of workers and families. Geoffrey Donaldson and the DUP do not take these matters seriously.
GB News understands UK authorities are responding to multiple incidents of small boats in the English Channel. It's understood at least 7 vessels were launched into the water in poor weather conditions. GB News has been told Dover lifeboat was called to a buoy around 9 miles off the Kent coast after reports of a person sitting on top of it and a small boat with dozens of migrants nearby. Ramsgate and Dungeness lifeboats, as well as several Border Force vessels, have also responded to other incidents. This is a breaking news story, and we'll bring you more news when we have it. Conservative Party chairman says Rishi Sunak is right to give Home Secretary Suella Braverman a second chance. The Prime Minister is facing backlash over reinstating Suella Braverman to the cabinet role. Ms Braverman left her job in Liz Truss's cabinet after she was reportedly sent an official document from a personal email account. Speaking to GB News, Tory chairman Nadeem Zahawi defended her reappointment, arguing she admitted the mistake. TV, online and DAB plus radio, this is GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own news from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other pay-per-review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Welcome back to GB Newsday. Let's update you on the latest on strike action, this time in the health service. Around 350,000 health workers, including nurses and paramedics, have started to vote on whether to go on strike over pay. They're members of Unison, the union, with more than 250 health trusts across England, Wales and Northern Ireland that could be affected. The ballot's going ahead. Well, the union calling on the government to top up a pay rise given in the summer, saying that health workers are just leaving the service for better paid jobs. Let's speak now to Helga Pyle, who is Deputy Head of Health at Unison. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, Helga. I think I'm right in saying that the pay offer was £1,400, which I think you've worked out equates to about 70-something pence an hour pay rise.
That's right, it's 72 pence an hour, and that really just is nowhere near enough for the cost of living crisis that people are going through. And it's just impossible for people to give good care when they're worried about their bills, they're worried about putting food on the table. But it's also going to do nothing to address the 130,000 vacancies that there are in the health service at the moment.
And I gather that I think she may have disappeared for the moment. Let's try and re-establish our link there to Helga. Helga, are you there again? I think we've re-established communications. You were just saying about this equating to 72 pence an hour, which clearly is not going to either retain or attract new workers to the NHS.
That's exactly the issue that the health workers, the porters, the paramedics, the nurses are so concerned about, because not only can they not manage on a 72 pence an hour increase, but they know that every day their colleagues are having to leave and get better paid jobs elsewhere. And that's just making the staffing situation worse. There's 132,000 unfilled vacancies. And they feel that they've run out of ways to try and get the government to listen to this, and that a strike ballot gives them the potential to say to government, you need to talk to us.
And I gather I'm right in saying that a deal has been done in Scotland where the figure is about 2,200. So, you know, the difference between £1,400 and 2,200, not that great.
So the health workers in Scotland have been voting in a strike ballot for a couple of weeks now, and what that has done has brought the Scottish Government back to the table with an improved offer. So that is the 2,200 that you referred to. But it's also important to make the point that already in Scotland, before this pay round, people were paid higher salaries for doing the same jobs as south of the border. Yeah. So Unison has decided to kind of suspend the strike ballot in Scotland and ask members whether they think that's enough or they want to continue. But we really would hope that the Westminster government would act in a similar fashion, come and talk to us and put something better on the table for the NHS.
Is one of your problems, however, that when you talk about nursing staff and paramedics, for instance, they clearly will not go on strike in terms of putting people's health and lives at stake?
Well, there's nothing inevitable about strike action happening. We really do want the government to listen to the fact that this vote's even taking place and respond to that in a positive way. But honestly, the people who work in the service right now are seeing such poor staffing levels. They're seeing such harm done to patients. If you just take the case of paramedics, many of them are spending an entire shift outside a hospital queuing to try and get their patient in. And that means they're not on the road able to respond to other calls. And they're seeing that happen each day because there aren't enough staff, and they know that a pay award would make such a big difference to that. So they won't take a decision lightly to go on strike, but they feel that it's the end of the road, really.
Yeah, and very quickly, when do we expect the result of that ballot?
So the result of this ballot will come towards the end of November. So that gives several weeks now for the new Prime Minister, the new Chancellor, the new Health Secretary to respond and act. OK, well, hopefully we can talk to you then and see whether there's any movement and whether that settles the dispute at that time. Thanks for your time here on GB Newsday. Now, let's move on to something called fracking. Exclamation mark. Yes, it's back. Yesterday, Rishi Sunak used his first PMQs, Prime Minister's Questions, to announce the reinstatement of the fracking ban, the moratorium, which, you remember, was lifted by
Liz Truss. Well, the new PM responded to a question from the Green MP Caroline Lucas about the shale gas moratorium, saying he stands by the party manifesto on the issue. Now, East Midlands reporter Will Hollis has more for us.
Prime Minister. A tight squeeze, yes, but the new Prime Minister's first PMQs didn't disappoint, especially for the Greens.
Will he start by reversing the green light she gave to fracking, since it's categorically not been shown to be safe?
We will deliver on all those ambitions. We will deliver on what we said at COP, because we care deeply about passing our children an environment in better state than we found it ourselves.
Have a bed. The Prime Minister's spokesperson later confirmed that the controversial ban on fracking was indeed back after his predecessor Liz Truss briefly removed it. In Derbyshire, local campaigners had feared the effects if discarded plans to frack near Eckington would return too, according to one Lib Dem councillor.
There was the noise pollution, the light pollution, the traffic movements, the fact that it would be affecting their local environment, and that's why they were against it, and that's why they rallied around to make sure that there was this Eckington Against Fracking group, which have done an amazing job in North East Derbyshire combating fracking.
But not everyone is happy, including the industry reps at UK Onshore Oil and Gas.
This decision is unjustified and unjustifiable. We are going to need natural gas in the UK for decades. If they go ahead and reimpose a moratorium, my question is, where is the natural gas going to come from? And what are the economic, environmental and geopolitical consequences of that decision? This all needs to be seen in that light.
In fracking, highly pressurised water and chemicals are blasted underground, releasing gas. The Tories paused exploration projects in 2019. Years of protests and investigations highlighted the risk of earthquakes around drilling sites like those experienced here in Lancashire. Yet now a global crisis has questioned Britain's energy security. Fracking could help. Campaigners at Just Stop Oil say no matter the necessity, fossil fuels are not the answer.
We have so many solutions to the climate crisis and to the cost of living crisis that we're just not using. It could be insulating homes, subsidising public transport, taxing the big oil polluters.
The prohibition on fracking is technically temporary, and political precedent can change as quickly as Prime Ministers. Will Hollis for GB News in Derbyshire.
Let's speak now to Sam Hall, who's director at the Conservative Environment Network. Sam, thanks very much for your time. I would imagine that a lot of Conservative councillors, both parish and district councillors, are breathing a sigh of relief over this.
Yes, that's right. I think it was a popular move by Rishi Sunak to go back to the position in the 2019 Conservative manifesto, which said that the moratorium on fracking would stay in place unless there was a change in the scientific evidence. The government did commission a review of the geology of around fracking, and that found that there hadn't been any greater certainty about whether fracking caused seismicity, caused earthquakes, and so I think it is right to go back to the ban.
However, there is now, of course, this huge question about energy security. I gather Rishi Sunak's been championing the causes of offshore wind farms and nuclear power as well. The same problems, maybe not with the offshore wind farms, but who's going to want a nuclear power plant in their back garden?
Well, I think that's right, though. And the reason why Liz Truss's government looked again at fracking was because of energy security, because of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Gas prices have obviously shot up. And I think if there was potential to secure vast amounts of gas from fracking, it would have been worth looking at again. But even the fracking trade body predicted that in 5 years' time, we'd only be able to get 5% of our gas demand from fracking. And that's if there was no local opposition to fracking sites. And we know that fracking is deeply unpopular. The reality is that it got caught up in planning applications and been thrown out in lots of different town councils and city councils across.
Forgive me, I mean, that is my point about nuclear energy. It's going to take 10, 20, 30 years to get nuclear plants in place. You've got all the planning difficulties. And, of course, when we've had winter days when there's no wind, we're not getting any of that green energy from the offshore farms.
Yeah, that's right. I think there are obviously challenges with local approval for lots of this energy infrastructure that we're going to need. I would point out, though, that fracking is by far the least popular source of energy, according to every opinion poll that is done on this. I'm more optimistic that people will be persuaded to take nuclear power stations, onshore wind farms, solar farms, particularly if the government explores an incentive scheme where people that host this energy infrastructure get money off their bill in return for having the infrastructure in their local local community. But yeah, ultimately, we are going to need to increase our energy supply, and more of it needs to be clean as well if we're going to tackle climate change. So I'd like to see the government go further on renewable energy, speeding up the process for those new offshore wind farms to go through the planning system and the permitting to be built. I think there's much potential to go further and faster in some of these areas, as well as in reducing our energy demand and getting rid of energy waste in our homes by insulating more homes. That's another area I think the government could look at if it needed to improve energy security.
Sam, thank you very much indeed. Fracking off for now, at least. Anyway, thanks for your time. Now, it's been announced the Duke of Sussex, Prince Harry, and his book, the memoir, going to be released on the 10th of January. The title, Spare. And there is the front page with a very intense-looking Duke of Sussex. The title, a reference, of course, to the phrase "The Heir and the Spare," being published by Penguin Random House. Let's get more with our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker. Not in time for Christmas? Oh,
Not in time
you've even
for Christmas.
got the artwork.
Here it is, yeah.
It's quite a sort of, well, it's not frightening. Which camera are we going to pick that? There we are. That's it. Yeah.
It's quite a steely look, isn't it?
Yes. Oh, thank you. Oh, no, him.
Oh, no, him,
okay,
yeah. Yes.
Why not in time for Christmas?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? We were expecting this memoir to be published before the end of the year, in time for Christmas, in time for American Thanksgiving. But, of course, now we have a release date of January 10th. Clearly, we don't know the 100% what the reason is, but we can very much, I think, speculate perhaps it was seen as not appropriate so soon after Her Majesty the Queen's death. And, of course, the content of the book is a big what is he going to say in this book about his members of the royal family, his father, his mother-in-law, now, of course, King Charles III, Queen consorts. What's he going to say about them?
With the clue being in the title, Spare, perhaps it's the baggage he's been carrying, the heir and the spare, with William, of course, being now very much front and centre of the plans for the royal family. And we've just had this discussion, of course, about the situation if the King and Queen Consort are away from the country. We understand that maybe he and the Duke of York are still councillors of state, if that happens? Or?
Yes, that's what we're led to believe, that we'll just have additional councillors of state, which will widen the pool where King Charles will choose from when he has to decide who's going to be doing his business when he is abroad or when he is ill. But as for Prince Harry's memoir, it's said that it's going to immediately bring readers back to one of the most searing images of the 20th century, and that was the young Prince Harry, the young Prince William walking behind their mother's coffin, Princess Diana.
Yeah, and you know, indications of the psychological damage that he said that he suffered as a... But do we think there's been some rewriting or rethinking because of what's happened with the royal funeral and the fact that obviously both Harry and Meghan saw the reaction of those crowds in Windsor that we saw the walkabout with William and Kate?
Yeah, it's certainly a possibility. I think perhaps that's a plausible reason as to why it has been delayed until January the 10th. Of course, there's no official confirmation on that, but it certainly wouldn't be surprising, perhaps, now that Her Majesty the Queen is no longer with us and it's King Charles, Queen Camilla. And I think perhaps we've been led to believe that Prince Harry and Meghan have been wanting to have a year of reconciliation with the royal family. And of course, putting this memoir out there, if he is going to, it's a big if, he is going to slate any members of the royal family, would not be perhaps in their best interests to do so. The book itself is going to cost £28 for a UK hardcover. He is donating some of his proceeds to charity. He's already donated $1.5 million to Sensible, which is a...
Or Sentibale, that's
which helps young people with affected by HIV and AIDS, but not all, of course. Some of the proceeds he is going to be taking. Of course, he's no longer a working member of the royal family, so he has to have an income from somewhere.
I saw a figure of 18 million he'd been paid for it from Penguin Random. Does that ring a bell, or... I mean,
well, we know it's certainly millions of pounds because they've given specific figures of how much he has donated. We don't have an exact figure, but it's certainly in the millions.
They're going to have to sell an awful lot at £28 a copy to make up those sorts of figures, aren't they?
I mean, the fact that now everybody I've seen online and in papers and on television is talking about it suggests to me that it perhaps will be an instant bestseller.
And do you get a sneak preview as a royal correspondent? Do they send it to you first before the rest of us mere mortals?
Perhaps. It's certainly on the cards. But one other thing to say, which I think is interesting, is that Prince Harry will be narrating his own audiobook.
Oh, for the audiobook?
Yeah. Yeah, so he's going to be narrating it himself, so that'll be something to listen to the tone of voice he puts on certain phrases.
I shall hand back the colour copy of the front page to you and keep that safe. Thank you very much indeed. Now, the Royal British Legion launching its 2022 Poppy Appeal today. The campaign, of course, raises hundreds of millions of pounds for both serving and former members of the armed forces and their families. And it's been doing so since the end of the First World War. Our national reporter Paul Hawkins has more for us with what I think they're calling the Wall of Poppies, Paul. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right, Mark. In fact, if you have a look behind me, this is the wall itself, which is here for the launch. And you might be able to make out behind the poppies, there are kind of circular discs, and they've got stories from the ambassadors for the Royal British Legion, and each person has a story to tell about how their family and how they are connected to the conflict. So, for example, behind one of those is an 11-year-old girl called Imogen, and she talks about how her dad serves in the military and he goes away for long periods at a time, and she has to cope with that loss of her father. So this year's appeal is as much about remembering those who've served, both past and present, but also the families and the legacy of serving in that conflict. Now, I could tell you all about why it's important to remember, but let's hear from someone now. He's 98-year-old Bernard Morgan, who served in D-Day, and I spoke to him earlier. What do you remember about D-Day?
The very most important and saddest thing was seeing all the dead soldiers lying on the beach. They arrived on the very first raid, 5 o'clock in the morning, and unfortunately the landing craft had dropped them out in too deep water. When they jumped out the landing craft, they got that much equipment on, he dropped down in the water and they got drowned. I'd never seen a dead body before, and it was sad to see all these lads lying there, and the army were going around taking their identity discs off them. That was the main thing I remember about D-Day. As a young lad, when you see all those dead bodies, I thought at the time, it could have been me.
You still do your salute, don't you?
Sorry?
You still do your salute, don't you?
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Have you got one of you saluting now?
Yeah, you can do one now if you want. There you go. Brilliant.
Longest way up.
And can I just say thank you? Thank you for what you did. Thank you for what you did on D-Day.
Yeah. Well, like the other lads, we thought when we get...
Well, Paul, that was extraordinary. It's so important, these stories of living history, and to remember and pay tribute to these people, as well as raising the money. And obviously, they've moved one of these train strike days to enable people to attend the British Legion event.
Let me know. Thank you very much.
Yeah, they have. Yeah, they have. They've moved these train strikes, which is the least you can expect, really, a mark of respect, really, for those people who've served in the wars, those who are no longer with us, and those that still are, like Bernard, a remarkable man. In fact, his daughter Sheila was here earlier, and she told me that someone was watching the TV earlier, some tourists from Canada. They saw him they were watching a breakfast, and they came down here to say thank you on behalf of the people of Canada to Bernard while he was still sitting here. She left her hotel, come down here and said hello after seeing him on the TV. So people have been having their pictures taken with him. Yeah, people have been having their pictures taken with him all day. He's a remarkable man, and I loved chatting to him. I chatted to him for a very long time. That was about a minute from a good 20-minute conversation we had. He's still very active. He lives by himself. Yeah. There were times here when he was saying, I don't want a chair, I'm going to stand, I don't want a chair for this. So he's still very active, still going, and 98 years young.
Yeah, and that sacrifice at D-Day, of course, leading to the liberation of Europe, an incredibly important time. Just very quickly, Paul, where is the wall? Where can people see it at London Bridge?
It's in somewhere called the Hayes Gallery, so just around the corner from HMS Belfast, very close to London Bridge Station. It'll only be here for today.
Lovely. Paul, thank you very much indeed for bringing us that great story, and, of course, people to pay their own tribute at the Wall of Poppies. Your views now on what we've been bringing to you here on GB Newsday on the strikes. The NHS strikes Virginia's email to say the unions are not helpful. The people who are striking should take responsibility for themselves. Each pay rise they get, the rest of the country will be plunged into crisis. Most of those striking already on good pay. Well, maybe not quite for the nurses, perhaps. But anyway, why do they think the government should pay for everything for them? I was always in a union, but feel all they want to do is to fight. on the triple lock on pensions. Judith's been in touch to say, once again, this government is choosing the wrong priorities, hitting the most vulnerable at a time when the cost of living is so high. The government should scrap the TV licence as well for the elderly. And on Prince Harry's new book, Greg, you're fast out the traps on this. Wait for it. He's a spoilt, ungrateful, jealous man who needs to learn he should be grateful for all he has. Maybe it won't be on your Christmas list then. Anyway, keep those views coming. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Stay with us on GB Newsday. Lots more to come in the next 2 hours, including updates on that situation in Stormont, reaction to fracking and whether it's on or off. Let's get the latest weather in the meantime.
Hello, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Staying windy and damp in the north today, but drier and brighter in the south by the end of the afternoon. And wherever you are, it is going to be, once again, very mild. We've got these south to southwesterly winds pushing up all this warmth from the south, and weather front has brought some heavy rain in places as we've started the day, but that's clearing north. The heaviest rain by the afternoon pushing into the North Sea, but I think a lot of cloud remains, especially for Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England, where there will be further outbreaks of rain, mainly over the higher ground, and it stays windy, especially in the north and around western coasts. But some brightness appearing in the south, where temperatures will climb up to 20, 21, perhaps even 22 Celsius, and mid to high teens are expected even across the north, where we've got the cloud and those outbreaks of rain. Chance of a heavy shower or two later in the day across central and southeastern parts of the country, but elsewhere drier for a time before further heavy rain pushes in from the west. That rain will be particularly persistent for Northern Ireland, and it will turn windy with gales around western coasts, 50-mile-per-hour wind gusts for exposed parts of Cornwall, for example, and a wet start for the west with that rain pushing through. It slides up towards the northeast, barely affects East Anglia and the southeast, and then by the afternoon on Friday, we're looking at brighter skies once again across England, Wales, Northern Ireland. A few showers pushing in here, but once again, a very mild day. High teens widely, mid-teens for Scotland. And the rain clinging on there for northern Scotland until the end of the afternoon. But even here, well, it is replaced by showers overnight. And then Friday night sees clear spells for a time. But it looks like the changeable weather will remain as we head into the weekend. Further spells of rain or showers, a lot of cloud in the forecast as well. But it does stay very mild.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England,
Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV.
on radio and online.
we're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is.
Come on, make the case. Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Good afternoon. It's just gone 1 o'clock. I'm Alice Porter in the GB newsroom. The leader of the Democratic Unionist Party says he will not support the reformation of the Stormont Assembly. Sir Geoffrey Donaldson made the comments amid crunch talks in a final effort to restore the Assembly this afternoon. MLAs are in Stormont attempting to elect a new Speaker, a prerequisite before an executive can be appointed. But the bid is set to fail if the DUP use its veto to block it. Under the current system, unless a power-sharing executive is formed before midnight tonight, Northern Ireland could be facing another election. But Mr Donaldson says unionists will not accept joint authority.
I do not believe that sufficient progress has been made to addressing the issues of concern to the people that we represent. We were given a mandate, a clear mandate in the Assembly elections, that we would not nominate ministers to an executive until decisive action is taken on the protocol. That remains our position, and so today we will not be supporting the nomination of ministers to the executive.
But the Vice President of Sinn Féin blamed the DUP for the failure to form an executive.
Geoffrey Donaldson points the finger at everyone else for the DUP's own indefensible and enduring failures. The facts are that back in May, people voted for change. They voted because they want politics to work. The electorate want grown-up politicians to take everyday challenges seriously, the things that impact on the lives of workers and families. Geoffrey Donaldson and the DUP do not take these matters seriously.
Oil giant Shell has reported another quarter of huge profits. The energy firm made £8.2 billion in 3 months to September and will increase payouts to shareholders. The earnings are lower than the previous 3 months, but still more than double the same period in 2021. In the first half of this year, they reported record profit amid soaring oil and gas prices. GB News understands UK authorities are responding to multiple incidents of small boats in the English Channel. It's understood at least 7 vessels were launched into the water in poor weather conditions. GB News has been told Dover lifeboat was called into a buoy around 9 miles off the Kent coast after reports of a person sitting on top of it with a small boat with dozens of migrants nearby. Ramsgate and Dungeness lifeboats, as well as several Border Force vessels, have also responded to other incidents. This is a breaking news story, and we'll bring you more news when we have it. The Conservative Party chairman says Rishi Sunak is right to give Home Secretary Suella Braverman a second chance. The Prime Minister is facing backlash over reinstating Suella Braverman to the cabinet role. Ms Braverman left her job in Liz Truss's cabinet after she was reportedly sent an official document from a personal email account. Speaking to GB News, Tory chairman Nadhim Zahawi defended her reappointment, arguing she admitted the mistake.
People deserve a second chance, and redemption is a good thing. Suella is a very talented Home Secretary. She's got a massive in-tray to deal with, not least with the small boats issue where people are being exploited, their lives being put in danger. We've seen the numbers rise this year.
Nicola Sturgeon has written to the new Prime Minister for the first time, urging him to tackle the cost of living crisis. The First Minister of Scotland asked Rishi Sunak to consider increasing benefits in line with inflation and an enhanced windfall tax on energy companies. She also called for increased funding for devolved administrations, blaming inflation for making it more difficult to fund public services. And a 38-year-old therapist has been found guilty of killing her friend and dumping her body more than 200 miles away. Gemma Mitchell hit Mi Kun Chong over the head with a weapon at her London home, decapitating her, then leaving her body in Devon Woods 2 weeks later. The prosecution claims Mitchell planned to murder the 67-year-old and fake her will to inherit over £700,000 worth of estate. She was remanded into custody and will be sentenced tomorrow. Ukraine has boosted its forces in the northern region near to Belarus to counter any possible renewed Russian attack across the border. Representatives from the army say they're anticipating further threats. Belarus is Russia's main ally in the conflict and has allowed Russian forces to use its territory as a springboard to attack Ukraine. And the Duke of Sussex's memoir, titled Spare, will be published on January the 10th. The book's title is a reference to the phrase the heir and the spare and is expected to lay bare his life as a royal. Published by Penguin Random House, it's said to take readers back to one of the most searing images of the 20th century. Two young boys, two princes, walking behind their mother's coffin. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens.
Alice, thank you very much indeed, and welcome back to GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst. Well, let's update you now on the situation in Northern Ireland, where politicians have been trying, and so far failing, to get power sharing back on track at Stormont. They've been warned there will be now new elections if they can't get back to work. But this is the scene live in the Assembly at Stormont. Politicians are there, still trying to bridge the continuing divide. But the latest that we've heard from the Ulster Unionist Party leader Doug Beattie, describing anger in the Assembly chamber, but saying it's nothing compared to the anger in the towns and villages across Northern Ireland. We'll have the latest from Belfast. While in Westminster, Rishi Sunak now in charge as Prime Minister, but questions already being asked about how much political control he has. His reappointment of Suella Braverman as Home Secretary proving a major distraction just days into his new premiership. A former party chairman now questioning her position. And is the triple lock pension actually under threat? What will the Silver voters make of the latest government twists and turns? And we'll have the latest on the Channel migrant crossings. GB News being told another flotilla has taken to the waters, with boats carrying children in trouble. We'll have the very latest for you with Mark White. But first, let's head back to that debate still taking place in the Northern Ireland Assembly ahead of a vote to elect a speaker. But it's a last-ditch attempt to avoid another election under the current system. Unless that power-sharing executive is formed before midnight tonight, the parties will once again be forced to go to the ballot box. Well, here's a clip of what the DUP's leader, Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, said a little earlier.
Today, to be clear, we do not believe that sufficient progress has been made to addressing the issues of concern to the people that we represent. We were given a mandate, a clear mandate in the Assembly elections, that we would not nominate ministers to an executive until decisive action is taken on the protocol to remove the barriers to trade within our own country and to restore our place within the United Kingdom internal market. That remains our position, and so today we will not be supporting the nomination of ministers to the executive. Questions?
What do you say to those who accuse you and your party of being responsible for the downfall of Stormont?
I say to all the people of Northern Ireland that we want a Stormont that is based on firm foundations. To do that, we need to remove the rubble of the protocol that has undermined our economy, that has inhibited our ability to trade within our own country, that has changed our constitutional status without our consent. A protocol that every day is harming businesses and driving up the cost of living for every single person in Northern Ireland. I will not rest until this matter is resolved, and the sooner that happens, the better. We are not responsible for calling the election. That is a matter for the government. We are here ready to work towards a solution on the protocol, and we ask simply that people respect the mandate we have been given.
Well, that was Sir Geoffrey Donaldson a little earlier. Let's cross to Belfast now and speak to our Northern Ireland reporter, Dougie Beattie, who's been following events. And they've got till midnight tonight, but clearly from what Sir Geoffrey Donaldson was saying there, Dougie, no chance of the Ulster, or the DUP rather, coming on board.
Definitely not. I mean, you can see the sort of pressure they're under. They're under that pressure from all other parties here, but also it appears from Heaton Harris, the Secretary of State. This isn't unusual for Northern Ireland. In 2017, the last elections, Sinn Féin stayed out for 1,044 days. That was more time out than they were in. So there's not many. This Stormont Assembly here, it is more, I suppose, relevant to a local council. It doesn't have any fiscal raising powers. It has a block grant of about 9.6 billion, then Barnett consequentials of about 8.4, 8.5 billion. So about 18 billion amongst 1.9 million people. It's a pretty good purse, and how they can't make it work is beyond most that's here. The parties here want to get on with the job, but of course the protocol is driving horse and carriages right through the middle of the Good Friday Agreement, and that's all about consent. It's all about taking Northern Ireland away from the rest of the UK, its biggest customer. Jeffrey Donaldson made no bones about it when he stood. In fact, these institutions were brought down in February with the resignation of Paul Givan. He resigned as First Minister, leaving whatever ministers were at the executive table still in place. Legislation was put through the House of Westminster to keep them in place for 24 weeks after the new election on the 5th of May. That comes to an end at 11:59 tonight, and we will see what happens then. But it is widely mooted now that Chris Heaton-Harris will be calling elections, and we will imagine they will be somewhere in mid-December, in around the 15th of that month.
Politicians from all parts of the divide indicating that election probably is not going to solve anything.
Well, it's not, because what will happen is, and it is not, it's no way strange that the SDLP and the Ulster Unionists are the most animated in this whole process in the chamber, because they are the two middle ground, if you like, nationalist and unionist parties. And of course Sinn Féin will turn this into a border poll and say that, you know, we deserve a border poll. So a lot of nationalists will vote for Sinn Féin, and an awful lot of unionists will then vote for the DUP, whether they like it or not, in order to stay as part of the UK. And what will happen is we will polarise Northern Ireland even further, and when it comes back after that election, we will still be with no government because the protocol has not been sorted. And that's all well and good in a lot of ways. That's up to the EU with London to sort that out. The worrying thing, of course, is what fills that vacuum when that happens. There was quite a lot of serious civil disturbance and so forth in Northern Ireland last year over the protocol. Politicians saying they would sort it out. Article 16 was going to be fired, was going to be used, and of course it wasn't. And we've now got to this space. But Liz Truss had been making progress in this. I mean, I spoke to hauliers last week who in particular are very angry about the situation because it is putting thousands of pounds onto pallets and goods coming into Northern Ireland.
Dougie, thank you very much indeed for that at Stormont. Let's move from Stormont back to Westminster and speak to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. And Darren, we hear from Sir Jeffrey Donaldson. Clearly, it's this Northern Ireland protocol that's still the major barrier, literally. What are we likely to get from the new Rishi Sunak government on this? Because perhaps we've seen some softening of positions on various things after the Liz Truss approach. Could that be the same on Northern Ireland?
Well, it's going to be really fascinating, this. Dougie is right in pointing out that there seemed to be at least the good mood music in recent weeks around the Northern Ireland Protocol. We heard it from both London and indeed Dublin and Brussels with suggestions that there was now the space for a deal, and we hadn't heard that mood music for quite a long time. Essentially, this idea that there would be a compromise on goods going from Great Britain into Northern Ireland as long as they stayed inside Northern Ireland. The EU seemingly willing to compromise on these kind of green lanes, if you like. At the same time, with the British government potentially prepared to compromise on the role of the ECJ, the European Court of Justice, in administering the kind of parameters of that deal. So there did seem to be room for a deal. Will that still hold on a Rishi Sunak? Not entirely sure. It depends how politically he feels confident in all of this, because clearly the ERG, the right-wing group, the Brexiteers within his party, do not want to see necessarily a massive compromise on the protocol. Though, interestingly, he has spoken in the last 24 hours or so to both the Taoiseach, Micheál Martin in Dublin, and to Ursula von der Leyen in Brussels, the EU Commission President, essentially saying that the Prime Minister restating his preference for a negotiated solution. That was with Ursula von der Leyen. And with the Taoiseach, Micheál Martin, they agreed that there was a preference for that negotiated outcome and hoped that all parties would approach the current challenges with pragmatism and goodwill. Read into what you want, Mark. We're just going to have to wait and see if there is the prospect of a deal, all I would add is the political uncertainty in Northern Ireland, the rhetoric we may well see during an election campaign when both sides tend to run towards the extremes rather than the centre, may make the prospect of any deal a little bit more difficult.
Now, we were hearing that perhaps the appointment of Suella Braverman was to buy off effectively the ERG, the right wing of the party. Clearly, it's proved another difficulty for the Prime Minister in these opening days, with no less than a former party chairman saying or questioning whether she should have been appointed.
Yeah, Michael Gove said yesterday, Mark, the politics was going to be boring again. There is no sense of that today. And it is a reminder, though, that Rishi Sunak may well have had a good PMQs yesterday. The cabinet reshuffle to a large degree went relatively well, and he has brought some stability to the markets, but there is still a lot of infighting inside the Conservative Party, being no doubt about that. And there is concern about the appointment of Suella Braverman, not least of all about this suggestion, at least, that the Cabinet Secretary was not very happy with the reappointment, given the breaches of the Ministerial Code only a week before. How do we know that there were breaches? Several breaches of the Ministerial Code. Well, you only had to listen to Jake Berry, the former chairman of the party, up until this week, under Liz Truss, saying that Suella Braverman essentially was fired because she broke that code several times. Even suggestions today, Mark, that MI5 have had to step in to brief the Home Secretary. Yes, to brief the Home Secretary on security clearance. Quite incredible. There is a lot of political pressure. Have to wait and see where this story runs to next.
Yeah, we'll be back to you when we learn more. Darren, for the moment, thank you. But let's just delve back into the Prime Minister's in-tray. And, well, there we find the triple lock pension. Or do we? Because this is the mechanics that raises the state pension in line with inflation or with 2.5% or with average age, whichever is the highest. Well, it's all coming after former Prime Minister Liz Truss pledged the opposite, that it would get shelved, a potential U-turn which would bring the fresh challenges to the UK's pensioners currently battling with that cost of living crisis. Joining us now, Dennis Reid, Director at Silver Voices. It's a membership organisation for senior citizens in the UK. Dennis, thanks for joining us. Do you know where you are with this?
No, we don't. We don't know at all. You know, it's like hokey cokey. It's sort of in, out, and shake it all about. 1 minute we've got the triple lock, the next minute is gone, virtually on a daily basis. And although I'm joking about it, it is a very serious matter. It is mental agony for lots of pensioners who can't afford their food prices and they can't afford their energy prices, to be told 1 minute they're getting 10% on their pension, albeit next April, and then to be told, well, maybe it's not anymore and it might be 5%, you know, is actually intolerable. It's mental torture. And we need reassurance before the 17th of November that the government is going to stick by its promise that it's made so many times, that the triple lock will be restored. The new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, has made a great thing about saying that his mandate comes from the manifesto in 2019. Yeah. And that was a key element of it. So that mandate will be seen as worthless if key promises like that are not followed through.
What do you think the reaction would be if there was a suggestion it would be more means tested? Because clearly the critics say, well, there are some pensioners who actually are quite well off, and to give them a 10.1% increase, because that's the inflation rate in September when it was set, may actually be, well, not a waste of money, but rather extravagant.
No, we don't agree with that at all. There is already a means-tested system of pension credit for those on a very, very low state pension. But those, you know, those people who are relying on the state pension as their main source of income, there are millions of those people, and it can't easily be resolved by some sort of means test. The means test would probably cut off at the same point that pension credit does now. But there are so many people who are on less than £200 a week that desperately need extra support for their energy and food prices. No, we wouldn't go down that road at all.
So is that another worry about whether the various allowances and pension credit are going to be index linked to inflation as well?
Yes, of course, and that was another promise that benefits would be inflation proofed. And yes, there's some very important benefits like pension credit that apply to pensioners too. So we want reassurance on that as well. And we're going to be campaigning really hard between now and the 17th of November to make sure that there is a switch back again to the triple lock is on.
OK, Dennis, thank you very much indeed for bringing us the silver voice and joining us here on GB Newsday. Thank you. Well, let's hear what our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, has to make of all this with On the Money. Liam, thanks for being with us. Hokey, cokey and shaky.
More U-turns than Swindon Roundabout. Crikey, it's like Spaghetti Junction, isn't it, to refer to Birmingham?
What do you expect is going to happen on this triple lock on November? Because we're getting different messages from different parts.
We certainly are. Liz Truss, she stood at the dispatch box and said she would implement the triple lock, which was a Tory manifesto commitment in 2019. And that would mean, as you explained before you talked to Dennis, Mark, that pensioners on the basic state pension, there's 11.5 million of them, would get that 10.1% increase because that is the rate of inflation in September.
Which is pretty hefty.
It is pretty hefty, and it would cost an awful lot of money. It would cost about £16 billion for the rest of this Parliament, and of course the increase lasts forever. We're not going to reduce the basic state pension in cash terms, so it's a massive financial commitment. I suspect, and it gives me absolutely no pleasure to say this, I know a lot of pensioners watch and listen to GB News, I suspect they won't deliver it on the triple lock. The reason I think that, and we've had mixed messages even now, Rishi Sunak backing away from it yesterday, Nadeem Zahawi on the television this morning saying, actually, we may do it. I think what they will do is they will do more targeted support for particularly vulnerable pensioners. Now, that does lead to means testing issues. Some people fall through the cracks. They may use some kind of characteristic-based test of who's eligible for additional top-ups through pension credit, maybe through other characteristics like immobility, disability, particular characteristics of pensioners to try and get the money to people who need it most, while acknowledging that a lot of people working won't get anything like a 10% pay increase.
But the worry, therefore, is that what else then will start being means tested? You know, winter fuel allowance or energy help, and you know, are you going to have a first and second class citizen status as being a pensioner? Because it was, you know, a universal help.
OK, it will still. No one's taking away the basic state pension. You'll still have a universal basic state pension. The question is, do you have additional stuff on top? And we've had that for years. I mean, even not a few years after Beveridge, we started introducing additional help for particularly hard-up pensioners. And look, some people will be screaming at their radios and televisions hearing about this. There are lots of hard-up pensioners in Britain. There is pensioner poverty in Britain. Unfortunately, and it's a tragedy in a rich country like ours, there will be pensioners who die because of the cold, because they're choosing between heating and eating. But I think the Tories are making a calculation when the public finances are looking a little bit better now than they were just a few days ago, given all kinds of movements in financial markets, which we've discussed over the last few days, Mark. But I still think there are tough decisions to make, and the Tories will be thinking, a lot of pensioners are going to vote Tory anyway. We don't want to alienate hard-working families who can't make ends meet either.
But some of those pensioners have got private pensions. They're looking at what's happening in the stock market, which is not great at the moment. But just to give an overall picture, I just did notice the FT had a phrase, the dullness dividend, i.e. the fact everything is settled down, that the markets were OK, that maybe this will help the government with its borrowing.
Well, what the traders in the city have been saying up until now is they've been talking about a moron penalty, like the additional amount of money that the government has to pay to borrow because what they see as irresponsible fiscal policies. And the government borrowing cost, the 10-year gilt, which ripples across the economy, was 4.2, Mark, on Friday. It's now 3.6. That's a massive downward shift in an advanced economy. So maybe we are getting a dullness dividend. Certainly, if government borrowing costs continue to fall, mortgages will fall. They'll still be higher than they were, and it should mean there's less government interest to pay from the state's coffers, which should free up the public finances just a little bit. Still tight, though.
Yeah, but being dull is good, they say here.
In this
instance, it is, yeah.
Dull as a form of compliment.
Liam, as ever, thank you for that. More, of course, as it comes through, as we will be with our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, because GB News understands the UK authorities currently responding to multiple incidents in the English Channel. We'll have the latest for you on that. But let's take a short break for you now.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Welcome back to Newsday. Thanks for joining us once more. Now, GB News understands that the UK authorities are currently responding to multiple incidents in the English Channel, with those people smugglers sending more inflatables into the water in pretty poor weather conditions. Well, our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, joining us in the studio with the latest on it as ever. Mark, what are we learning from the lifeboat crews and so on?
Well, 7 separate incidents that the Dungeness, Dover, Ramsgate lifeboats have been responding to, along with Border Force vessels. The most worrying incident reports that a person was seen clinging to the Colbert Light buoy, which is about 9 miles off the Kent coast. They were seen clinging and waving from that. The authorities have gone out there. They've apparently found some personal belongings on that light buoy, but no sign of anyone there, and the fear is that they may well have been just swept out into the sea now.
And the human cost yet again of this.
Well,
and you know, you've been reporting that a lot of them on the boats are single men, many Albanians, but reports maybe that there are children on some of these boats as well at the moment.
Yeah, more than 80% of those that come across are young male people on the boats. But yes, there are some women and children on the boats as well. And it is, of course, you know, for them, an arduous crossing and very cold. Yeah. And today, particularly 30-mile-an-hour winds in the channel, high waves, which for a big vessel is not a problem, but for a flimsy inflatable, it's treacherous. And, you know, authorities are concerned that it's, you know, may only be a matter of time before we see another mass drowning like we did in November of last year when 27 people died.
Yeah, and an indication yet again, these people smugglers, of course, have no hesitation in just pushing people off in whatever conditions. Now, the other issue is you were actually down in Kent yesterday at Manston at one of these processing centres. We say processing, but they're effectively being held there. Now, we've had an urgent question in the Commons within the last few minutes on that particular issue.
Yes, the Manston Processing Centre, it's supposed to deal first of all with those arriving within a few hours, a day at most, and then they're sent out to interim accommodation like hotels and then onward to council housing stock. However, because of the volume coming across the channel, some of these people are in what are described as less than ideal conditions for weeks, sometimes more than a month at a time. So there was an urgent question from the chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee to the new Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, who won that post, arguably the most difficult job in government. So this is that exchange that took place just a short time ago.
The situation at the Manston facility for cross-channel migrants constitutes a major incident that is escalating in severity. The Independent Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration just yesterday described it at the Home Affairs Select Committee, and I quote, a really dangerous situation, and had left him speechless.
I was of course concerned to read the evidence that was presented to her committee yesterday by David Neal, the Independent Chief Inspector. I will be meeting Mr Neal next week and will be listening to his concerns directly, and I intend to visit Manston as soon as possible, hopefully next week.
So Robert Jenrick there undertaking that he'll visit Manston next. I mean, what are the alternatives? If they shut it down or take it out of the system, where do all these people go?
They can't shut it down. It's the processing centre where, the initial details, documents are handed over, they're given food and clothing and just made ready to be passed on to the interim accommodation in hotels. What they will have to do, because of the numbers coming across, is actually expand the facilities and make them more capable of housing people not just for a day, but actually for weeks at a time. It's not ideal. It is an emergency situation. It's something that Robert Jenrick and, of course, Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, are going to have to address as a matter of urgency. The previous Home Secretaries have failed to impact this problem. Let's see what they do.
Yeah, Mark, as ever, thanks for updating us with this ever-changing picture. Thank you very much indeed. Well, staying with migration, the former Conservative Home Secretary Amber Rudd has actually called the government's policy on Rwanda brutal. Now, in an exclusive interview with Gloria, she's also criticised Suella Braverman's suggestion that she dreams of deporting migrants back to Rwanda. This is what she had to say.
I don't believe in it. For the start, I think it is a brutal policy, which we should not have introduced anyway. But it is also, putting that aside, impractical. I just don't believe it will ever happen. So I think there's a real problem with the growing numbers of people putting their lives in danger. In a way, it's a shared problem with the French, and I hope that this new government is going to address it by having a better relationship with the French. I mean, let's face it, it can only improve.
Rishi Sunak says he's committed to the Rwanda policy. Obviously, he's brought Suella Braverman, who I might ask you about a question about in a second, as Home Secretary, who is fervently, she dreams of sending people to Rwanda.
Yeah, I mean, that's an extraordinary thing to say. She should dream of having a safer policy, which certainly she's entitled to dream about having borders where you don't have lots of people arriving across a dangerous passage like the Channel, but not perhaps to put it quite in those terms that she has.
Well, you can watch the full interview that Gloria's had with former Home Secretary Amber Rudd tomorrow here on GB News at 1:30. Some pretty interesting things to say there. Coming up, Rishi Sunak. Is he our best-dressed Prime Minister? Well, let's think about Boris Johnson in his suits. Well, his sometimes expensive sartorial tastes, could they be a political liability too? Well, first, let's get an update on the news headlines with Alice.
It's 12:35. I'm Alice Porter in the GB newsroom. The leader of the Democratic Unionist Party says he will not support the reformation of the Stormont Assembly. Sir Geoffrey Donaldson made the comments amid crunch talks in a final effort to restore the Assembly this afternoon. MLAs are in Stormont attempting to elect a new Speaker, a prerequisite before an executive can be appointed. But the bid is set to fail if the DUP use its veto to block it. Under the current system, unless a power-sharing executive is formed before midnight tonight, Northern Ireland could be facing another election. But Mr Donaldson says unionists will not accept joint authority.
I do not believe that sufficient progress has been made to addressing the issues of concern to the people that we represent. We were given a mandate, a clear mandate in the Assembly elections, that we would not nominate ministers to an executive until decisive action is taken on the protocol. That remains our position, and so today we will not be supporting the nomination of ministers to the executive.
But the Vice President of Sinn Féin, who are in favour of re-enter power-sharing government in Northern Ireland, blamed the DUP for the failure to form an executive.
Geoffrey Donaldson points the finger at everyone else for the DUP's own indefensible and enduring failures. The facts are that back in May, people voted for change. They voted because they want politics to work. The electorate want grown-up politicians to take everyday challenges seriously, the things that impact on the lives of workers and families. Geoffrey Donaldson and the DUP do not take these matters seriously.
Oil giant Shell has reported another quarter of huge profits. The energy firm made £8.2 billion in the 3 months to September and will increase payouts to shareholders. The earnings are lower than the previous 3 months, but still more than double the same period in 2021. In the first half of this year, they reported record profit amid soaring oil and gas prices. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.1573 and €1.1528. The price of gold is £1,436 and 11 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,057 points.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria De Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB Newsday and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst. Let's update you a bit of breaking news we're getting on the financial front, and that is that the European Central Bank in Frankfurt has raised its interest rate, the benchmark rate, by 0.75% to 1.5%. Now, the rise comes despite criticism from many political leaders across Europe that the tighter monetary policy could risk destroying growth. Much of Europe suffering the same problems as Britain, of course, trying to get economies moving. And all eyes here on the Bank of England November the 3rd for its interest rate decision, widely expected perhaps to go to 0.75% increase. Will it be higher? We shall update you, of course, as that comes through. Well, talking of banks, away from central banks, what about food banks? The need for such things increasing during this cost of living crisis. We're now going to baby banks, it seems. They're supplying struggling parents with cots, prams, nappies and clothing for their newborn. Well, Baby Basics UK, founded in Sheffield back in 2009, but it now has 56 centres across Britain. The charity says it's currently facing its highest referrals ever, with demand for help jumping by almost a third. The donations, though, they're slowing down. Our Yorkshire reporter Anna Riley has more.
A package full of essentials is what charity Baby Basics UK supply to struggling families across the nation. Here at the centre in Sheffield, the rise in the cost of living means the need for its services has risen by 28% this year. But the charity is struggling to meet demand.
So across the UK last year we supported 39,000 children and their families, and we're expecting it to be around 45,000 this year. For Sheffield, which is our inaugural and busiest centre, last year we supported just over 10,000 children and families in the city, and we're expecting it to be around 15,000 this year. Referrals come from professionals, but what we hear from our professionals is families are just continually unable to make ends meet, and a lot of the time this may be working families who've got one or both parents in work but still can't make ends meet, just because the costs are rising and everybody is fearful about what's coming, including us, about what's coming in the next few months, because we're struggling and demand for us is so high right now, and it's only October. What happens when it comes to January and people are having to put their heating on? We're getting often referrals, especially from our family centres in Sheffield, asking for extra blankets for the family so they can snuggle on the sofa with a blanket rather than putting the heating on. So they're the kind of demands that are changing as time moves on.
For CEO Kat Ross, the government needs to be doing more to help support families on low incomes.
In 2022, we should not be having children in a city like Sheffield who are sleeping on a floor or sleeping in a pram or sleeping on a sofa. We shouldn't have parents unable to do a full day's work because they're tired, because they haven't been able to sleep, because they're having to choose to co-sleep with their child, so they're not getting good sleep. They're worrying about how they're going to feed them in the morning. So how can we expect people to hold down jobs in those situations? And I think we have a mental health crisis in this country and not enough investment in our mental health services. And all of this anxiety for parents is detrimental to their mental health. So it's an ongoing issue that impacts every area of society. And I think there needs to be more joined up thinking about how we tackle it as a whole.
With winter approaching, families across Britain are more reliant than ever on charities like this, who are doing the best they can in such unprecedented times. Anna Riley, GB News, Sheffield.
Help for the youngest joining the cost of living crisis. Now, the Royal British Legion has launched its 2022 Poppy Appeal, with the campaign, of course, raising hundreds of millions of pounds for both serving and former members of the armed forces and their families. It's been going since the end of the First World War. Well, fields of remembrance now opening to the public up and down the country so that we can all pay our respects and remember those who gave the ultimate sacrifice. Our South West of England reporter Jeff Moody is in Swindon at one of those fields. And Jeff, of course, it's not just a time to remember, but to give help as well. It's a double-edged sword.
Absolutely it is. Well, there are 6 of these remembrance sites dotted around the country. This one opened this morning. There was a memorial service, very moving service, first thing this morning. And this, of course, kick-starts the whole of the British Legion's Poppy Day appeal, which culminates, as we know, in Remembrance Sunday. Now, the idea here is that you can come along and buy one of these wooden memorials, dedicate it to somebody that has died and fought for their country, and plant them in one of these fields of remembrance. At the end of this period, after Remembrance Sunday, all of these wooden crosses will be burned, cremated, and then the ashes will be scattered over the fields of remembrance in France. Well, earlier I spoke to Peter Saunders, who's the community fundraiser here in Wiltshire. Why do you think it's so important for people to come and dedicate a memorial specifically for people they know?
It's such a personal place to come, and has such a personal, and in the area that it is, Rwanda and Bassett, has such a personal connection for a lot of people, especially with the more recent conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq. It's open to the public throughout the entire appeal, so very much a very personal place for a lot of people.
And this year, we've also got Her Majesty the Queen on our minds, haven't we, at this time?
Absolutely, yes. She was a patron of the charity, the Royal British Legion, for 70 years, a former veteran herself as well, and really in her life completely epitomised what we're remembering at this time of year.
And in another note, a strike by National Rail has been moved to move it away from Poppy Day commemorations. The Rail, Maritime and Transport Union were due to strike on the 5th, 7th and 9th of November. They're now not going to strike on the 3rd of November, which was part of their planned action, so that more people can come and gift these memorials for people that have died.
Jeff, thanks very much indeed for joining us there at Swindon. And of course, we'll reflect on those moments of remembrance in the days ahead. Thank you very much indeed. Now, let's move on to something that may be familiar to you. If I say fracking, yes, it's back, or is it? Well, yesterday, Rishi Sunak using his first Prime Minister's questions to announce the reinstatement of the fracking ban. And that had been lifted by his predecessor, Liz Truss. Well, the Prime Minister responding to a question from Green MP Caroline Lucas about the shale gas moratorium, saying that he stands by the party manifesto when it comes to the issue. Our East Midlands reporter Will Hollis has more for us.
Prime Minister. A tight squeeze, yes. But the new Prime Minister's first PMQs didn't disappoint, especially for the Greens.
Will he start by reversing the green light she gave to fracking, since it's categorically not been shown to be safe?
We will deliver on all those ambitions. We will deliver on what we said at COP, because we care deeply about passing our children an environment in better state than we found it ourselves. Have a bit.
The Prime Minister's spokesperson later confirmed that the controversial ban on fracking was indeed back after his predecessor Liz Truss briefly removed it. In Derbyshire, local campaigners had feared the effects if discarded plans to frack near Eckington would return too, according to one Lib Dem councillor.
There was the noise pollution, the light pollution, the traffic movements, the fact that it would be affecting their local environment, and that's why they were against it, and that's why they rallied around to make sure that there was this Eckington Against Fracking group, which have done an amazing job in North East Derbyshire combating fracking.
But not everyone is happy, including the industry reps at UK Onshore Oil and Gas.
This decision is unjustified and unjustifiable. We are going to need natural gas in the UK for decades. If they go ahead and reimpose a moratorium, my question is, where is the natural gas going to come from? And what are the economic, environmental and geopolitical consequences of that decision? This all needs to be seen in that light.
In fracking, highly pressurised water and chemicals are blasted underground, releasing gas. The Tories paused exploration projects in 2019. Years of protests and investigations highlighted the risk of earthquakes around drilling sites like those experienced here in Lancashire. Yet now a global crisis has questioned Britain's energy security. Fracking could help. Campaigners at Just Stop Oil say no matter the necessity, fossil fuels are not the answer.
We have so many solutions to the climate crisis and to the cost of living crisis that we're just not using. We could be insulating homes.
subsidising public transport, taxing the big oil polluters.
The prohibition on fracking is technically temporary, and political precedent can change as quickly as prime ministers. Will Hollis for GB News in Derbyshire.
Well, joining us now in the studio is Charles McAllister, Director of Policy at UK Onshore Oil and Gas, who you saw in that report. And I think you've even got the same tie for continuity. Good man.
Different tie.
Oh, different tie. OK, well, same pattern but different colour. Yeah. Have you lost the battle?
Well, what I would like is some clarity from Downing Street. I think they owe us that courtesy at the very least, because we have had no formal clarification.
Oh, really? So nothing from government?
No, we don't. We have always, all we're getting is what's been said in the media.
Right.
But as I correctly said, you know, this decision, if it is true, is unjustified and unjustifiable.
Why is that? Because clearly the concern goes back to, I think it was Blackpool and Quadrillo were drilling, and there was that earthquake, I think 2.9 magnitude.
Correct. So let's put that 2.9 seismic event in context, OK? The surface vibration from that event lasted for 2 seconds and is 1/2 the maximum permitted at construction sites. So if fracking is unsafe, construction's unsafe, geothermal's unsafe, and the quarrying industry is also unsafe. There needs to be a level playing field here. The previous government understood that. And if I could just quote Rishi Sunak only a few months ago, he said, if you look at what these academics have said, the seismic activity is not out of the ordinary. He said he supported fracking where there was local support. What has driven this fallacy?
Therein lies the issue, local support. There are so many communities, many of them backed by Conservative councillors, who don't want this. They are frightened of it.
Well, there are people in the north of England who do support it. The problem is they are reticent to actually come out and stick their head above the parapet for fear of retribution from...
Really?
Yes,
of what kind of retribution?
Well, the protesters, the activity of the protesters in and around the sites has been unacceptable. Someone broke onto an onshore oil and gas site and set off a flare. I don't really think I need to tell you that's not safe. If you look in Lancashire, the head of the North West Ambulance Service had to write a letter to Lancashire County Council because the protesters called ambulances 7 times for no reason other than the cameras, and the head of the ambulance witnessed abuse of staff. So again, this is not why we were going for fracking in the first place, is to make sure we were not overly reliant on imports for decades.
Okay.
If this goes ahead, that's what's going to happen.
Obviously there are those protesters who say that they do so peacefully and that they have a right to do so. But the other issue is, you know, is this cheap gas? Because many people have said that even if we get it out to the ground, it won't affect the wholesale price across the market. That's the big problem.
There's 3 ways that shale gas can reduce prices in the UK. Number 1, local community benefits. So for an exploration site, £100,000 goes to the local community.
This is what Jacob Rees-Mogg was talking about.
Yeah, but we've had this in place for years in our community benefits package. This isn't new. I haven't just pulled this out recently. A shale gas site at a production stage, we have already committed to give a share of revenue to local people. That could be worth between 4 million and 400 million over 20 years. So that can be used for things as reducing bills. But on the wholesale, there are 2 points. Number 1, if we continue down the business as usual, fingers crossed, approach to gas supply, which this new government seems to condone.
Well, no, they're talking about offshore wind and nuclear, aren't they?
It's not an either or, though. Look at every single net zero scenario the Committee on Climate Change has put together. What they've shown is, number 1, we are going to need natural gas, no matter what other technologies are there. Number 2, the North Sea cannot produce enough. So there's going to be a shortfall between what we're going to produce in the North Sea and what we're going to consume. The question is, where does that come from? Imports do not offer the evident economic, environmental and geopolitical benefits a domestic shale gas industry would offer.
So the fight goes on.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us. We'll speak to you again, no doubt. So we're talking about Rishi Sunak. Now here's a question. Is he the sharpest dresser to grace the corridors of number 10? Well, fashion journalists reckon that our new Prime Minister may be a game changer with tailoring so sharp it can cut through butter. It says here. Well, he sometimes is displaying expensive sartorial tastes, becoming a focal point in the leadership campaign over the summer. Liz Truss's allies, such as Nadine Dorries, you remember suggesting he was campaigning in a £4,000 outfit, or £3,500, 450 quid for the shoes. Let's get the views now of fashion writer and trend analyst Tony Grenville. Tony, thanks for joining us. Clearly, he was seen striding up Downing Street in that very sharp suit, although some say it's been sort of shrunk in the wash a little bit.
I think we have to remember that it's a very modern development to be so worried about what people are wearing in that sense, particularly in his role. But I think, you know, he's small build, he's got a slight frame, and he's having his suits made so they don't swamp him and they look fine. I think he could do with a bit more white cuff, to be honest. I think the sleeves look a tiny bit short. But on the other hand, if that suits him and that's practical for him, and also the fact that he clearly has more than one suit, but they're all pretty identical. So in a way, it takes away the worry about what he's wearing.
And how important is it that you look statesmanlike or that you are dressed rather sharply? Because clearly Boris Johnson was at the other end of the spectrum, but he still attracted the sort of support of many members of the public. Even perhaps it's had that sort of slightly cuddly image as well.
I think it's interesting you yourself are dressed quite formally to do your job so that we respect you and we listen to what you say. You've got a nice shirt, tie, jacket, etc. on. And I think this sort of backlash against tracksuits about the fact that working from home, COVID, lockdown, the rebirth of men wanting to look smarter, but also in difficult times, I think for a lot of men, they want to look like they're successful. But I think, you know, that idea that a suit is still one of the best things, because if you get a good suit, and it was always the extraordinary thing with Boris Johnson, I assume he didn't buy them from a second-hand shop, but they never fit.
And should we perhaps have a hurrah for British tailoring? Of course, Savile Row regarded across the globe as an image of modern Britain.
You know, it's something we do extraordinarily well, and it's one of the most technical things in clothing, great tailoring, and the Brits are brilliant at it. People come in from all over the world to Savile Row and to the tailors in the vicinity and across London, and they have amazing, amazing clients who don't even think about going anywhere else in the world for their suits. They're straight to London.
Unfortunately, Tony, as you were speaking there, we had a shot of Boris Johnson who'd just come across on his flight from his holiday with his shirt hanging out the back of the suit. Anyway, we'll accept that as it is. However, there is an issue when we get a cost of living crisis, when Nadine Dorries, you know, talks about £450 Prada shoes, a £3,500 suit. You've got to really, if you pardon the expression, tailor yourself to the circumstances.
You do, but unfortunately in 2022, heading towards 2023, these are not high prices. If you look at the cost of even the high street with a lot of the brands, and I'm not going to particularly mention the names, but if you go across the high street, all the prices have gone up on straightforward tailoring, on shoes, on everything. And £450 for a pair of designer quality shoes that will last and last and last, as opposed to a cheap pair that will have to be replaced in 18 months' time, is a very different way of looking at your clothes. His suits will outlast most people's cheap purchases. So, you know, in a way, he's investing in his clothes.
Yeah. The trouble is you have to keep the waistline going at the same measurement. However, that's a different topic. Tony, for the moment, thank you very much indeed for joining us with a very smart shirt and jacket combination there. Stay here on the sartorially excellent GB Newsday. So much more coming up. But let's take a short break first.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock
on GB News.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV.
On radio.
And online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me from 9 p.m. to midnight every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Hello and welcome to GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst. With Northern Ireland's politicians still trying to get power sharing back on track as we speak. Now, if unsuccessful, new elections lie ahead for the Assembly. Assembly meetings continuing at Stormont with politicians from both sides trying to bridge the continuing divide. We'll have the very latest for you from Belfast. And in Westminster, Rishi Sunak, just a few days into his prime ministerial hot seat, already facing speculation whether his government is actually up to the job. Mixed opinions, even from his own party, on the reappointment of Suella Braverman as Home Secretary, his non-commitment to the triple lock and pensions, and fracking. Who knows what could be coming next in the autumn budget statement next month? And as that cost of living crisis rumbles on, people's businesses, towns and cities starting to crumble under financial strain, we're told. But one town in Manchester getting creative on how to get the money rolling in. Our local reporter there has the story. And don't forget to get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk. Latest news headlines now, though, with Alice.
Good afternoon. It's 2 o'clock. I'm Alice Porter in the GB newsroom. Politicians in Northern Ireland have reached a stalemate over restoring the power-sharing executive, with hours remaining before a new election must be called. Sir Geoffrey Donaldson, leader of the Democratic Unionist Party, says he will not support the reformation of the Stormont Assembly. MLAs are attempting to elect a new speaker, a prerequisite before an executive can be appointed. But the bid is set to fail if the DUP use its veto to block it. Under the current system, unless a power-sharing executive is formed before midnight tonight, Northern Ireland could be facing another election. But Mr Donaldson says unionists will not accept joint authority.
I do not believe that sufficient progress has been made to addressing the issues of concern to the people that we represent. We were given a mandate, a clear mandate in the Assembly elections, that we would not nominate ministers to an executive until decisive action is taken on the protocol. That remains our position, and so today we will not be supporting the nomination of ministers to the executive.
But the Vice President of Sinn Féin blamed the DUP for the failure to form an executive.
Geoffrey Donaldson points the finger at everyone else for the DUP's own indefensible and enduring failures. The facts are that back in May, people voted for change. They voted because they want politics to work. The electorate want grown-up politicians to take everyday challenges seriously, the things that impact on the lives of workers and families. Geoffrey Donaldson and the DUP do not take these matters seriously.
Oil giant Shell has reported another quarter of huge profits. The energy firm made £8.2 billion in 3 months to September and will increase payouts to shareholders. The earnings are lower than the previous 3 months, but still more than double the same period in 2021. In the first half of this year, they reported record profit amid soaring oil and gas prices. GB News understands UK authorities are responding to multiple incidents of small boats in the English Channel. It's understood at least 7 vessels were launched into the water in poor weather conditions. GB News has been told Dover lifeboat was called to a buoy around 9 miles off the Kent coast after reports of a person sitting on top of it and a small boat with dozens of migrants nearby. Ramsgate and Dungeness lifeboats, as well as several Border Force vessels, have also responded to other incidents. The Conservative Party chairman says Rishi Sunak is right to give Home Secretary Suella Braverman a second chance. The Prime Minister is facing backlash over reinstating Suella Braverman to the cabinet role. Ms Braverman left her job in Liz Truss's cabinet after she was reportedly sent an official document from a personal email account. Speaking to GB News, Tory chairman Nadhim Zahawi defended her reappointment, arguing she admitted the mistake.
People deserve a second chance, and redemption is a good thing. Suella is a very talented Home Secretary. She's got a massive in-trade to deal with, not least with the small boats issue where people are being exploited, their lives being put in danger. We've seen the numbers rise this year.
Nicola Sturgeon has written to the new Prime Minister for the first time, urging him to tackle the cost of living crisis. The First Minister of Scotland asked Rishi Sunak to consider increasing benefits in line with inflation and an enhanced windfall tax on energy companies. She also called for increased funding for devolved administrations, blaming inflation for making it more difficult to fund public services. Ukrainian troops are holding out against repeated attacks by Russian forces in 2 eastern towns. President Zelensky has accused Russian commanders of craziness in their efforts to capture the eastern town of Bakhmut. It's been the centre of Russian attacks for months. Overnight, Russian forces also struck the power grid in central regions of Ukraine. The country's capital and Kyiv region are facing 30% shortfall in power generation. Meanwhile, Poland has dismantled 4 communist-era monuments honouring Red Army soldiers. As part of a renewed drive in condemning Russia's war in Ukraine, workers used drills and heavy equipment to destroy the 1945 statues at 4 different locations across Poland, something the Kremlin has condemned. A 38-year-old therapist has been found guilty of killing her friend and dumping her body more than 200 miles away. Gemma Mitchell hit Mi Kyung Chong over the head with a weapon at her London home, decapitating her, then leaving her body in woods in Devon 2 weeks later. The prosecution claimed Mitchell planned to murder the 67-year-old and fake her will to inherit over £700,000 worth in estate. She was remanded in custody and will be sentenced tomorrow. The Equalities Watchdog says pupils should not be unfairly singled out at school because of their afro hair. The Equality and Human Rights Commission say policies which ban certain hairstyles without making exemptions on racial grounds are likely to be unlawful. This includes styles like afros, braids, locks or head coverings. The guidance is said to help schools ensure their policies on hair are not unlawfully discriminatory. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Mark.
Alice, thanks very much indeed, and welcome back to GB Newsday, where we are still awaiting some kind of breakthrough in Stormont on power sharing. Let's cross now to Belfast and join our Northern Ireland reporter, Dougie Beattie, who is there for us. Dougie, I gather they're still talking in the Assembly, but clearly without Sir Geoffrey Donaldson and the DUP being on board, they can't effectively get power sharing back on track for the moment.
That's totally correct, and they're just at this moment in time coming out of the lobbies after voting to try and elect a speaker. That will not go well for them, and therefore the power sharing institutions will not run. We are expecting them out here very shortly to this press conference area to talk about just what the next move is, but we all know what that is. It will be to Chris Heaton-Harris, the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland. Will he carry out his threat of elections to take place in early December? Now, he must also strike up a budget for Northern Ireland, and how he will quite do that with no ministers in place. You would imagine that he would have to put some sort of legislation through the House of Commons to keep ministers in place, this zombie government, if you like, until this election, and then possibly for another 24 weeks after it. I'm just hearing now that, of course, the motion has been negatived, so that is it. There is no more Speaker, and that will be the end of this run of the Northern Ireland Assembly if Chris Heaton-Harris carries out his threat.
The threat, as you say, was that the elections would now go back. This is following what happened in May. Sir Geoffrey Donaldson already saying, I'm not afraid to take my case to the people. But, I mean, looking at the sort of numbers on both sides, it's not going to resolve anything, even when we get the election result in December.
If anything, it'll make it worse because it will turn into a beauty contest, first of all. Then the SDLP will turn it into some sort of border poll. The people that will suffer the most in that is the moderate parties, the likes of the SDLP, the Ulster Unionist parties in the middle. This is exactly what happened with David Trimble and John Hume back in 2005. And, of course, the DUP returned as the biggest party, along with Sinn Féin. And the SDLP and the Ulster Unionists, which were both moderates, lost control of the Assembly. You might well point that out as where the Good Friday Agreement went terribly wrong, and it's looking to go that way again. We will end up with two extremes coming back, and in the middle, the Alliance Party will probably... It's hard to know where their votes will go in this, but for sure the DUP and the Sinn Féin will come back as large parties, and the problems with the protocol will still be there. I did hear Gordon Lyons say in the House that, of course, if nationalists had to enforce a border on the island of Ireland and have their ministers doing checks on it, they wouldn't like it either. So perhaps if some of the more moderate nationalist parties had have came to the centre ground with the Unionists, we may not be in the problem that we're in now.
OK, Doogie at Stormont, thank you for that. But let's head from Stormont straight to Westminster and speak to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who's also following these events. And, Darren, we were hearing earlier from Sir Geoffrey Donaldson about this block that the Northern Ireland Protocol is forming to any kind of further developments. I mean, what is the Rishi Sunak government likely to do on that? Because they have been changing their position on various things from the Liz Truss administration.
Yeah, indeed. Just first of all, on this, though, we have to realise that obviously the protocol cannot be sorted out by the Northern Irish parties. That's a big part of the problem, isn't it? We have to remember that Stormont is not up and running because the DUP essentially are saying we're not prepared to go back into government with Sinn Féin while that protocol is still in place. Now, they're doing that not because Sinn Féin can actually be part of the solution to this, if you like. They're doing that because they're trying to leverage some power with the British government to unilaterally take action when it comes to the Northern Ireland Protocol. Now, you talked about Liz Truss government there. It is notable, actually one of the very few successes, it seems, for Liz Truss government, is that there was really good mood music around the possibility of a deal on the Northern Ireland Protocol. It was coming from London, it was coming from Dublin, it was coming from Brussels, that a compromise could be found on these kind of green lanes at Belfast and ports elsewhere. The goods travelling from Great Britain into Northern Ireland, as long as they stayed in Northern Ireland, weren't necessarily going to be checked. Added to that was the British government prepared to make a deal on the role of the ECJ, which is what Brussels essentially wanted. The ECJ would still have a role in governing the Northern Ireland Protocol. There did seem that there was a possibility of a deal there. Now, what's going to happen with a change of government? We'll have to wait and see on that, though it is notable that Rishi Sunak had conversations with both the Irish Prime Minister, the Taoiseach Micheál Martin, last night, and Ursula von der Leyen, the EU Commission President, as well, both restating that view that they wanted to see a negotiated settlement in all of this. Yeah. But will there be enough time, not least of all because what elections, of course, tend to do, Mark, irrespective of where they are, but maybe particularly in Northern Ireland, is they send each of the parties to the extreme, the rhetoric gets louder, and the space and the ability for compromise gets a lot more difficult.
Yeah, and talking of compromise, let's talk about Suella Braverman and the other issues in the inbox for the new Prime Minister, because clearly Sir Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper were attacking Rishi Sunak and the government backing the new Home Secretary. But we've now got Caroline Noakes, Tory MP, and even the former chairman of the party, Sir Jake Berry, really describing the breaches that she's allegedly involved with as really serious.
Yeah, indeed, and that they happened several times and contradicting her account. This is Jake Berry, I should say, the chairman of the Conservative Party up until Monday, contradicting her account, Suella Braverman's account, that she came forward once she'd realised she'd made a mistake by sharing these confidential documents. He's suggesting that no, she was confronted by the fact that she'd been caught out. Now, this has caused, as you say, an almighty stink here at Westminster. Some Conservative MPs are suggesting in the end, actually, was it worth it installing Suella Braverman in the post? Now, Number 10 are sticking by the position that everyone deserves a second chance, that she's a very capable minister, that her and the Prime Minister are on the same page when it comes to immigration, which is a pretty tough page, it should be suggested. But yeah, frankly, it's not a good look that you've got, again, Conservative infighting, blue-on-blue attacks on Suella Braverman coming from Conservative MPs, that you've got suggestions that MI5 may well be briefing the current Home Secretary in how not to share confidential information. Not entirely sure that's a good place to be. And also Labour pushing for what did Sir Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary, say about the dismissal last week of Suella Braverman and about the reappointment this week. Suggestions, of course, that he was not very happy that she got back the job as Home Secretary. So this is a story that's going to run, and it has in some ways tainted what was, you know, a pretty smooth cabinet appointments earlier on this week. And I think it is doing a little bit of damage to what had been proved to be a pretty stable first week for Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister.
Indeed. Darren, thank you for that. And on that very topic, let's now speak to Alex Dean, who is an advisor to David Cameron, now an expert in crisis management. Alex, as ever, thanks for joining us. Does he need to cut her adrift at some stage? But clearly this is becoming a distraction when he's got plenty of other things to deal with.
Yeah, I don't think so. I acknowledge, of course, that there is a lot of noise about it, not least because it's up to them. The Labour Party has doubled down on the issue. But what Sunak is plainly aiming for is a time of stability. A lot of his appointments, some of them harking back to Boris Johnson, some of them harking back even earlier, have been an attempt to demonstrate a cross-party inclusion in his cabinet and to demonstrate that people are going to be in post now for some time. That's why you've had a lot of reappointments to roles that people already held or had held formally. And it really cuts across all of that to lose someone in the great office of state very quickly. So I think the government is where it is, and it's going to have to hang on to Suella Braverman.
Reason being that the suggestion is that he's effectively bought off the right wing of the party, or at least the ERG, but by putting her back in this position.
I'd put it differently. I acknowledge the thrust of your question, but I put it differently by saying that there are only so many politicians, given the salience of the migration issue for the Conservative Party's membership, its grassroots, and the people, yes, as you say, on the right. There are only so many people that would be trusted to deliver on it. And Suella Braverman was top of that list. So he's demonstrated to a wing of his party with which he's had some up and down relationships that he really cares about their issue, and that he's put their champion, their stalwart, in place to deliver it. I think the biggest challenge for Suella isn't over this issue about ministerial code points and whether she emailed the wrong person. I think the biggest issue for her is delivering on stopping small boats coming from France. And I think that's the test that people are going to want to judge the Tory party by at the ballot box. And that's the test they're going to judge the Home Secretary by. After all, Mark, that's the test that former Home Secretaries have, I'm afraid, come up short on. So if she can deliver on that, this ministerial code point won't matter. If she can't deliver on it, then either way, she's cooked.
And we're learning from Mark White there are yet more boats in the Channel as we speak, and maybe even people who have been lost at sea, which is a dreadful thing to acknowledge. But part of that also is what happens about Rwanda. Now, Gloria has done an interview with Amber Rudd, former Tory party bigwig, indicating that she's not terribly happy about the approach on Rwanda. Is that one of the things that maybe they are going to have to try and temper before they go into the ballot box in 2 years' time?
I'd be surprised, because it's a popular policy amongst Tory party MPs and members. And I also think, with due respect to Amber Rudd, who of course had a distinguished career in the cabinet, that the Tory party's now got several people hanging around that we could describe, as you do, as bigwigs, who find themselves slightly superannuated, and the way that they get attention is to speak against party line. This is just at the time when Rishi Sunak needs party unity more than ever. The Tory party has torn down 3 prime ministers in a row. The biggest danger to a Tory PM isn't the Labour Party, with all due respect to it. The biggest danger to Tory prime ministers is other Tories. Now is the time for all good people to shut up and support Rishi Sunak.
OK, I was speaking to Liam Halligan about what they call the dullness dividend in the FT, obviously speaking about the markets and the economy, but you think that should apply to the politics as well?
Oh, I really hope so. I mean, on the money front, things look great. The markets are bouncing back. The delay on the fiscal event suggests that the government's going to have a good deal more to play with, perhaps even £15 billion coming back into government coffers, more than expected on previous forecasts, and demonstrated that the OBR is going to have a chance to speak before the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, makes his announcement. All of that, I think, is really positive. And I think right now the government would like the politics to go as smoothly as the economics is going.
Alex, as ever, thank you very much indeed. And
Thanks,
still
Mark.
fascinated to see what's on your bookshelves. We can't quite see, but no doubt some good stuff on there. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Well, we're talking to Alex about the markets. Well, the European Central Bank has announced an interest rate rise, 75 basis points, or 0.75%. It's the third consecutive increase this year. And, of course, the question, what's the Bank of England going to do? November the 3rd, of course, the interest rate decision. It might be another squeeze for mortgage owners ahead. Let's hear what our economics and business editor Liam Halligan has to say with On the Money. So, Liam, Frankfurt gone for 0.75%, and that was the figure that they were suggesting maybe that Threadneedle Street's looking at as well.
Yeah, it's a big chunky increase by the European Central Bank. This is the central bank that covers the whole of the Eurozone. So France, Germany, Italy, lots of big economies and some smaller ones too. The deposit rate, or the base rate in the Eurozone now is 1.5%, and ours here in the UK is 2.25%.
Yeah.
So our interest rates are still higher than they are in the Eurozone. I think the ECB has been very, very reluctant to raise rates, Mark, for a long time, until recently, until these three successive rate rises, 0.5 in June, 0.75 in September, and another 0.75 now. If you do the maths, interest rates are actually negative in the in the Eurozone for quite a while. And they've been reluctant to raise rates because the economy has been so fragile, and some countries in particular have been really suffering within the Eurozone with economic stagnation.
Yeah.
But there will be a demonstration effect here. The fact that the ECB's gone for a bold 0.75% increase in interest rates, the second in a row, could put more pressure on the Bank of England come the 3rd of November. On the flip side, though, the fact that gas prices are going down, we said that before, a sense that maybe inflation in the UK has now peaked, lots of ifs and lots of subjective things there, but that may be that the Bank of England feels that there is scope to only raise interest rates by 0.5%. But I think it will be at least 0.5%, 50 basis points on the 3rd of November.
That might be the governor phoning to say, no, it's going to be a full 1%.
He's after some advice.
Yeah. I mean, just to look at the reaction of what the bank has done in Frankfurt, lots of politicians across Europe saying this risks destroying growth. And this is actually the centre of the argument. And we are getting indications here that we are indeed probably heading for a technical recession. And there is a decision as to, for the bank, how far and how fast do you do it?
This is what economic policy making is all about. Tough choices. The Bank of England really wants to get on top of inflation. That means raising interest rates to slow the economy down. Of course, the politicians in general don't want the economy to slow down, because that means less tax revenue, less feel-good factor, less popularity. This is why we have independent central banks, because they have to take difficult decisions, because we know from history that high inflation does a lot more damage to wealth creation and society than slow growth. So there is a choice.
Talking of wealth creation, while you're here, Shell, third quarter profits, 8.2 billion, actually down from 9.9 from last time round. But Shell's saying, look, we're investing in the North Sea, so therefore, a windfall tax actually is not going to work, because that money's going back into North Sea operations as an investment, and therefore we get a tax break on it.
Be very interesting to see what Rishi Sunak does. I mean, we often hear Labour calling for a windfall tax. Of course, Rishi Sunak introduced the windfall tax in March. We just don't talk about it very often, but he did when he was he's the former Chancellor. Now, of course, he's the Prime Minister. In March, he upped oil companies' tax on their profits to 60%. They already paid a premium before that. It will be interesting to see, now that the fiscal situation has deteriorated a fair bit, now he has to pay for the energy price cap, whether or not he goes for more of a windfall tax. I suspect that he won't. I suspect that he won't, because even when he did it last time, there was a way for the companies to get around the windfall tax if, instead of declaring their profits and giving it to their shareholders in dividends or extra executive pay, they reinvested it in exploration and production in the North Sea.
And they can only...
He may do that again.
Yeah, and they can only tax what they actually make here in Britain.
And a lot of that 8 billion, I haven't looked at the accounts in detail, I've had a quick look. These are global companies, and a lot of that headline figure will be on overseas operations.
Liam with On the Money, thank you for that. More, of course, as we get the figures coming through, but let's move up to Scotland now. Today, the First Minister's questions, with the opposition parties posing various things to Nicola Sturgeon. Scottish Conservative leader Douglas Ross laying into her, insisting there was no economic case for independence. However, she hit back by criticising his position over the crisis in Westminster. Let's hear their exchanges.
Rishi Sunak is fixing recent mistakes. The First Minister would wreck our economy for good. Nicola Sturgeon wants permanent austerity. Nicola Sturgeon wants permanent higher taxes. Nicola Sturgeon wants permanent economic chaos. And if she ever gets her way, we've heard today from European officials that she would leave us permanently isolated. Even if she won't admit it, the truth is that there is no economic case for the referendum she wants to hold in just 12 months' time. First Minister, Scotland rejected your plans for separation in 2014. Now your new proposals have been torn up by the EU. Isn't it time to drop your obsession and focus on people, businesses and communities right across Scotland?
And yes, I do want to have a referendum to give the people of Scotland that choice, because it's interesting, isn't it, that Douglas Ross is happy to come to this chamber and debate these matters, but he's not prepared to go and debate them with the people of Scotland. And if Douglas Ross really believed, that the Scottish people were going to reject independence, he would be clamouring for a referendum. The fact that he wants to block one, I think, speaks volumes. But you know, Presiding Officer, I'm not sure we should put much store at all on anything Douglas Ross has to say. Let me just reflect on the last few weeks in the life of Douglas Ross, leader, for now, of the Scottish Conservative Party. He called on Boris Johnson to resign, then he U-turned. Then he called on Boris Johnson to resign again. Then he U-turned again. He demanded that I follow the mini-budget. Then he applauded Liz Truss for scrapping the mini-budget. He voted for fracking in England. Now I think he welcomes the fact that the fracking ban has been reinstated in England. Just last week or the week before, he said that Liz Truss would win the next general election, and days later he welcomed the resignation of Liz Truss. Today he backs Rishi Sunak. Who knows what Douglas Ross's position will be this time next week?
Oh, exciting stuff there in Edinburgh. Let's speak with Conservative member of the Scottish Parliament, Sir Edward Mountain. And we were reflecting that things were pretty feisty in Westminster. It looks that there's even more going on up in Edinburgh.
Yeah, and it's just the right thing to be doing at the moment, because what we need to do is challenge Nicola Sturgeon's constant cry that independence is the solution to everything. She doesn't even know some of the times what the real questions are. But it's not the solution to everything, and I'm really pleased that Douglas took the economic arguments against independence to her at question time today.
Yeah, and questions, of course, now that oil revenue has dipped as to how they would actually sustain things. But is there slightly better mood music in the fact that Rishi Sunak is actually speaking to her, which wasn't necessarily the case with Liz Truss?
I've been a great supporter of Rishi. I supported him when he first stood in the leadership election. I think he's a very sensible man. I think he's got a strong grip of the economy and the economic case. And I think it's great he's Prime Minister. And I absolutely knew that he would reach out to include Nicola Sturgeon, although she may spend most of her life trying to push him away.
There have been so many U-turns on so many policy issues. Will the same happen on the referendum?
There will be no U-turn on the referendum. What we know from the SNP's economic case, which has been criticised by their economics advisors, is that we'd end up with a hard border between England and Scotland, 2 border crossing points, a destruction of the economy, and actually more hardship for Scots than they had to face during the COVID pandemic.
What is the position of the Tory party north of the border, given what we've gone through in these recent weeks? I mean, there's a suggestion if there was a general election, you'd be in for a wipeout up there.
No, we're not in for a wipeout up here. What we're doing is fighting the case for the union. We do that every single day, and we fight the case for our constituents every single day. And our constituents are constantly telling us about the issues that they face, mainly at the moment health issues relating to not getting access to treatment because this government isn't investing in it. It is allowing our National Health Service in Scotland to go into the winter in crisis mode. And that's just not good enough. That's what the constituents want to talk about. That's what we're talking about. And it's what the SNP are failing to talk about.
OK, so Edward Mountain, thanks for joining us there in Holyrood with your reaction. And we'll speak to you again soon, of course. Thanks very much indeed. Always good to know what's going on north of the border. What's going on elsewhere? Let's get an update on the news now with Alice.
It's 2:30. I'm Alice Porter in the GB newsroom. The Stormont Assembly in Northern Ireland has failed to elect a new speaker. The two nominations for the role failed to secure the necessary cross-community support from Assembly members. The DUP has refused to back the election of a speaker as part of its protest against the Northern Ireland Protocol. Oil giant Shell has reported another quarter of huge profits. The energy firm made £8.2 billion in the 3 months to September and will increase payouts to shareholders. The earnings are lower than the previous 3 months, but still more than double the same period in 2021. In the first half of this year, it reported record profit amid soaring oil and gas prices. Ukrainian troops are holding out against repeated attacks by Russian forces in 2 eastern towns. President Zelensky has accused Russian commanders of craziness in their efforts to capture the eastern town of Bakhmut. It's been the centre of Russian attacks for months. Overnight, Russian forces also struck the power grid in central regions of Ukraine. The country's capital and Kyiv region are facing 30% shortfall in power generation. Meanwhile, Poland has dismantled 4 communist-era monuments honouring Red Army soldiers. It's part of a renewed drive in condemning Russia's war in Ukraine. Workers used drills and heavy equipment to destroy the 1945 statues at 4 different locations across Poland, something the Kremlin has condemned. And the Duke of Sussex's memoir, titled Spare, will be published on the 10th of January. The book's title is a reference to the phrase the heir and the spare and is expected to lay bare his life as a royal. Published by Penguin Random House, it's said to take readers back to one of the most searing images of the 20th century. 2 young boys, 2 princes, walking behind their mother's coffin. TV, online and DAB plus radio, this is GB News.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me. Noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
And welcome back to Newsday. Now, let's tell you about some of the unique ways in which areas of Britain are trying to drive economic activity and, of course, therefore, get growth. In Manchester, huge inflatable monsters have been deployed, all part of an initiative to encourage more customers to enter the shopping district. They're taking the city over October half-term every year to encourage people, particularly, of course, families and the youngsters, to come and spend. Our North West reporter Sophie Reaper has more for us. Sophie, it looks a bit frightening.
It does indeed. The one behind me is very aptly named Ice Cream because it's situated on the ice ring for this year's market. Now, this is a scheme that was launched back in 2016. Now, of course, it's Halloween on Monday, but there is another slightly more serious reason behind it. It's from the Manchester BID, the Business Improvement District. And the idea behind it is over the half term to encourage families to come into the city centre to hunt down the monsters, which, by the way, I have been seeing people doing across the day. They've been coming with their maps and ticking them off as they find them one by one. But the hope is that when they come into the city centre, that they'll be encouraged to come into some of the local businesses, some of the larger businesses as well, and to spend some money in the businesses which may have been struggling. Here's what some of the people in Manchester thought of the idea.
I think they look really cool and everybody's going to enjoy it.
What about yourself?
I think they're really cool and I really like them.
Tell me about the monsters. What do you think of them?
I like them.
You like them? Which one's been your favourite one that you've seen?
The one here.
The green one? Why?
Because he looked like an octopus.
We've come around and actually hunted these monsters down using the map. I've seen quite a few people looking at these, looking around. There's loads of kids about, loads of families about. They've all got to spend money, haven't they? Cost of living crisis at the minute. We need a lot of business influx, people spending.
We've come into the city today and we were surprised by it. We didn't know it was happening, but it's brilliant. But if there was a bit more of a push on letting people know that they're here, and then more people might come in for it.
Do you think more revenue in the city centre is a good thing?
Certainly, yeah, definitely. It keeps people in the heart of the city, keeps them off retail parks. Everyone's a winner.
Now, of course, over recent years, businesses have been struggling, initially because of the pandemic and now because of the cost of living crisis. Now, we are just over 8 weeks away from Christmas, so we will start to see shops bringing out their Christmas decorations and hoping that people will come in to spend money. However, families may not be in a position to spend as much as they usually would. They're not going to be able to afford to spend as much on Christmas presents. They're not going to be able to afford to spend as much on food and drink and all the other bits that come along with Christmas. In fact, in a survey that was released this morning, 2/3 of UK adults said that they're planning on cutting back this Christmas. Now, Manchester BIC are, of course, hoping that with this initiative, with the monsters taking over Manchester, people will be encouraged to come into the city centre and spend money with some businesses who may really need the support this winter.
All your monster friends as well, and we'll, of course, hope that it starts to help the shops and businesses there in Manchester. Let's just bring you a bit of breaking news that we're getting, that Elon Musk has confirmed that he has bought Twitter ahead of a court-imposed deadline, a $44 billion takeover, remember. He's actually sent a tweet now to advertisers confirming the deal. The chief executive officer of Tesla saying, "There's been much speculation about why I bought Twitter and what I think about advertising. Most of it is wrong." Going on to say that he wants Twitter to be a digital town square. maybe with some inflatable monsters. Who knows? Well, we're talking about monsters. What about a monster book launch? Do you like the look of that? That is going to be the new book from Prince Harry, Spare. Cameron is with us in the studio. The book is, January the 10th, but clearly they've got all the details worked out. We thought it was going to be out in time for Christmas.
Yes, we were told. We were expecting it this autumn, so it would be out in time for Christmas, American Thanksgiving as well. Of course, it's going to be a massive market in the United States too. But it was delayed to January the 10th. Now, there's lots of speculation that perhaps because Her Majesty the Queen obviously passed away in September, it wouldn't be appropriate to launch the book quite so soon, but also the content of the book. Perhaps Harry has been having second thoughts with the contents because his father is now king. Camilla is now the Queen Consort, and there was speculation, not confirmed, I must stress, but speculation that perhaps he would talk about his personal relationships with those two in particular.
Yeah, and therefore one thinks about the reaction he had to his parents' marriage breaking up and the whole issue about, well, remember that phrase from Diana, there were three of us in the marriage, and of course what that meant to him. But just the title itself, Spare, and we think of that phrase, the heir and the spare. Clearly, the other issue is his relationship with his brother, who is heir to the throne, is now very much front of camera, and Prince Charles, or King Charles, I should say, is taking on the sort of mentoring role for him. Harry maybe is thinking that he really is now out of the equation.
Well, exactly. There's been several books, haven't there, which have been written over the years, which tries to kind of create a sense of what the relationship between Harry and his brother William is like. So, for example, we know perhaps there was a bit of disagreement as to which charitable interests they would have as they grew up and they left school and then had to forge a career for themselves within the royal family. We know they're both heavily involved in conservation work, for example, and they couldn't, and Prince William inevitably as heir to the throne, or was going to be king, had to, of course, take priority, which perhaps Harry saw as a bit of a snub.
Now, I think you've got is it £28 you said the book's going to be? Not cheap.
Yeah, no, £28, you're right, yes, and it's going to, some of the proceeds at least, is going to be going to charity.
This is an important issue, isn't it? Because there's been criticism about their money-making activities in California, but they are going to put some of this towards, I think Centre Barley was one of the charities very close to his heart.
Yeah, Centre Barley, of course, a charity set up by Prince Harry even all those years ago. $1.5 million already has been given to this charity by Prince Harry from the proceeds of the book. Of course, he's already been paid millions of dollars by Penguin Random House Publishing, the publishers of his book, in advance of the publication of the book. But I think another point to stress is, if you look back to the Oprah interview back in March 2021, where Meghan accused an unnamed member of the royal family of racism. Of course, the Buckingham Palace then put out a statement saying recollections may vary, but there's a lot of fears, perhaps, within royal circles that he's going to name and shame who that dubbed royal racist is in that book. Of course, not confirmed, but it's all this what if that's really kind of causing a lot of problems for the royal household. Which is all part, of course,
of getting people to buy the book, indeed.
Yeah.
Cameron, for the moment, thank you very much indeed. And there we are. We've got the front cover, at least, but the book will be with you, we hope, before January the 10th?
10th of January, hopefully with me slightly before that.
Good. Yeah. Now, let's tell you about the Royal British Legion, which has today launched its 2022 Poppy Appeal. The campaign, of course, raising hundreds of millions of pounds for serving and former members of the armed forces and their families. And it's been going, of course, since the end of the First World War, the 11th of the 11th. Well, fields of remembrance now open to the public up and down the country, with members of the public being able to pay their respects. Our South West of England reporter Jeff Moody is in Swindon at one of those fields and joins us there now. And, of course, we think, Jeff, it's not just a time where people can remember, perhaps even family members, but they can give to the charity as well to support even serving members of the armed forces at the moment.
That's right, Mark, and not just serving members from this country. Also, some money from the Royal British Legion goes to help the cause in Ukraine as well. So it's conflicts that are ongoing throughout the world. The idea behind these fields of remembrance, there are 6 of them dotted across the country. The idea is that it kick-starts the Royal British Legion's Poppy Day appeal, which of course culminates on Remembrance Sunday. And what you can do is you can buy a little wooden memorial, they're calling them. They're careful not to call them crosses. They're wooden memorials, and you can dedicate that to someone, maybe someone you know who has died in one of these conflicts or is fighting in one of these conflicts, and plant them in these fields of remembrance. And then when Poppy Day is over and done with, when we get to Remembrance Sunday, they will all be burned, and then the ashes will be scattered over the fields of remembrance in France. Well, earlier on today, I spoke to Peter Saunders, who's the community fundraiser here in Wiltshire. This is what he had to say about the event. Why do you think it's so important for people to come and dedicate a memorial specifically for people they know?
It's such a personal place to come. And has such a personal, and in the area that it is, Royal Wootton Bassett, has such a personal connection for a lot of people, especially with the more recent conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq. It's open to the public throughout the entire appeal, so very much a very personal place for a lot of people.
And this year, we've also got Her Majesty the Queen on our minds, haven't we, at this time?
Absolutely, yes. She was a patron of the charity, the Royal British Legion, for 70 years, a former veteran herself as well, and really in her life completely epitomised what we're remembering at this time of year.
And Jeff, have people got access to that particular part of the church there, so they can come in at all times of the day and night?
Yes, absolutely. It's a walled garden here in the park, so access, once the park is open, first thing in the morning, people can come in. It's closed at night, but during the day, people can come in whenever they want. And just a side note, there was going to be a strike by Network Rail workers arranged during this period, but Network Rail has cancelled that strike. The Rail Maritime and Transport Union, RMT, has said that its Network Rail members will strike on the 5th, the 7th and the 9th of November, not on the 3rd of November, so that people can come out for Remembrance Sunday if they wish.
Yeah, and remember wherever they are across the country, of course. Jeff, in Swindon, thank you for that. Let's move now to London. Our national reporter Paul Hawkins is there at London Bridge with not a field of poppies, Paul, but a wall of poppies behind you.
Yeah, that's right. In fact, it's a 6-metre long wall, Mark, and along the wall there are sort of circular plaques, and each one has the story of someone who is connected to conflict. So behind, as you take the poppies off the walls, you can read the story that's behind it. So for example, on one of these plaques, there's an 11-year-old girl called Imogen. She talks about how her dad, who's still a serving soldier, goes away for long periods of time and the impact that it has on her. There are also stories from those that have served in the war, and in fact they're also ambassadors for the Royal British Legion. They were here earlier today. One of them, 98-year-old Bernard Morgan, served on D-Day on the 6th of June 1944 during the Second World War, and we spoke to him earlier. What do you remember about D-Day?
The very most important and saddest thing was seeing all the dead soldiers lying on the beach. They arrived on the very first raid, 5 o'clock in the morning, and unfortunately the landing craft had dropped them out in too deep water. When they jumped out the landing craft, they got that much equipment on, they dropped down in the water and they got drowned. I'd never seen a dead body before, and it was sad to see all these lads lying there, and the army were going around taking their identity discs off them. That was the main thing I remember about D-Day. Yeah. As a young lad, when you see all those dead bodies, I thought at the time, it could have been me.
You still do your salute, don't you?
Sorry?
You still do your salute, don't you?
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Does he want one of you saluting now?
Yeah, you can do one now if you want. There you go. Brilliant.
Longest way up.
And can I just say thank you? Thank you for what you did. So, Thank you for what you did on D-Day.
Yeah.
Thank
Well,
you.
like the other lads, we thought when we get in, you know, we'd finish the job off.
Paul, wonderful to hear Bernard's story. And of course, this is, again, a very important part of this, the living history, because there are not many of them left now, bless them.
No, that's absolutely right, Mark. You know, one of very few that actually remember what it was like to fight in the Second World War, and that's why his memories are so important. And so that's why the Royal British Legion are saying, look, we understand there's a cost of living crisis this year, but donate what you can, wear a poppy as a thank you to Bernard and other serving soldiers as well, serving soldiers now, soldiers that have served in conflicts before, and also to say a thank you to their families that obviously go through a lot of trauma and a lot of worry and anxiety when their loved ones are away serving their country. Also, the money goes to support the families of veterans who take part in things like the Invictus Games. It pays for accommodation when they go and participate in those games. So we've been hearing a lot about how the money from the poppies goes to help the families of those veterans and indeed the veterans themselves. And the message this year is wear that poppy as a way of saying thank you.
And Paul, just very quickly, just to let people know where they can actually access the wall of poppies at London Bridge.
It is in somewhere called the Hayes Galleria. It's right next to London Bridge Station, and it is open for just over 3 hours more. It's going to be here. So if you're in the neighbourhood, do pop down and have a look. It's fantastic.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed for updating us there and bringing us Bernard's story as well. Great stuff. Now, we're talking about the cost of living crisis, of course, there with Paul. Let's reflect that the need of food banks has increased during that crisis, and so has, we're being told, the use of baby banks. Now, they're supplying struggling parents with cots, prams, nappies and clothing for their newborns. Well, Baby Basics UK was founded in Sheffield back in 2009, but it now has 56 centres across Britain. The charity currently facing its highest referrals ever, with demand for help jumping by almost a third. The donations, though, well, they're slowing down. Our Yorkshire reporter Anna Riley has their story.
A package full of essentials is what charity Baby Basics UK supply to struggling families across the nation. Here at the centre in Sheffield, the rise in the cost of living means the need for its services has risen by 28% this year. But the charity is struggling to meet demand.
So across the UK last year we supported 39,000 children and their families, and we're expecting it to be around 45,000 this year. For Sheffield, which is our inaugural and busiest centre, last year we supported just over 10,000 children and families in the city, and we're expecting it to be around 15,000 this year. Referrals come from professionals, but what we hear from our professionals is families are just continually unable to make ends meet, and a lot of the time this may be working families who've got one or both parents in work but still can't make ends meet just because the costs are rising and everybody is fearful about what's coming, including us, about what's coming in the next few months because we're struggling and demand for us is so high right now, and it's only October. What happens when it comes to January and people are having to put their heating on? We're getting often referrals, especially from our family centres in Sheffield, asking for extra blankets for the family so they can snuggle on the sofa with a blanket rather than putting the heating on. So they're the kind of demands that are changing as time moves on.
For CEO Kat Ross, the government needs to be doing more to help support families on low incomes.
In 2022, we should not be having children in a city like Sheffield who are sleeping on a floor or sleeping in a pram or sleeping on a sofa. We shouldn't have parents unable to do a full day's work because they're tired, because they haven't been able to sleep, because they're having to choose to co-sleep with their child, so they're not getting good sleep. They're worrying about how they're going to feed them in the morning. So how can we expect people to hold down jobs in those situations? And I think we have a mental health crisis in this country and not enough investment in our mental health services. And all of this anxiety for parents is detrimental to their mental health. So it's an ongoing issue that impacts every area of society. And I think there needs to be more joined up thinking about how we tackle it as a whole.
With winter approaching, families across Britain are more reliant than ever on charities like this, who are doing the best they can in such unprecedented times. Anna Riley, GB News, Sheffield.
helping out the youngest in the cost of living crisis. Now, let's reflect some of your views coming in on the politics of the day regarding Suella Braverman. First of all, Alan says, the only reason the Labour Party keep banging on about Braverman is because they know how good she is, running scared. Regards. OK. Kevin, meanwhile, saying don't get mugged by Labour Party regarding Suella Braverman. It's their mantra that they attack something, then they move on. Massive support for Braverman regarding the triple... Oh, sorry, for Braverman. I think the problem is, of course, it's the Tory party. Some of the members, including the former chairman that criticised her. So regarding the triple lock, Carl has written saying if UK government reneges on its manifesto commitment to the triple lock for a second time, I will never vote Conservative again. Keep the views coming in, of course, and we'll reflect them throughout the day here on GB News. Now, don't forget to tune in tomorrow because we've got an exclusive interview. Gloria has been speaking to former Conservative Home Secretary Amber Rudd, who's called the government's policy on Rwanda brutal. Here's a taste of what she had to say.
I don't believe in it. For the start, I think it is a brutal policy, which we should not have introduced anyway. But it is also, putting that aside, impractical. I just don't believe it will ever happen. So I think there's a real problem with the growing numbers of people putting their lives in danger. In a way, it's a shared problem with the French, and I hope that this new government is going to address it by having a better relationship with the French. I mean, let's face it, it can only improve.
Rishi Sunak says he's committed to the Rwanda policy. Obviously, he's brought Suella Braverman, who I might ask you about a question about in a second, as Home Secretary, who is fervently, she dreams of sending people to Rwanda.
Yeah, I mean, that's an extraordinary thing to say. She should dream of having a safer policy, which certainly she's entitled to dream about having borders where you don't have lots of people arriving across a dangerous passage like the Channel, but not perhaps to put it quite in those terms that she has.
So, controversial stuff on the migrant issue. You can watch the full interview that Gloria's had with former Home Secretary Amber Rudd tomorrow here on GB News at 1:30. But thanks for being with us on Newsday today with me, Mark Longhurst. I'll be back with Gloria at 12 on Monday. Coming up next, Patrick with you, so don't go anywhere. Update on the weather right now.
Hello there, I'm Stephen Keats with your latest Met Office forecast, and we've seen some rain pushing its way northwards over the last few hours. This will be across northern England and Scotland this afternoon. Brighter spells developing further south. It's quite a breezy picture out there, and once again it's very warm because the